Chapter 1052. This one could not ask for more. Qin Yining smiled and cupped his hands. Su Weiji and Xia Yu also respectfully bowed to LV Yun. The two sides modestly declined for a while before entering the straw hut. The light in the straw hut was unexpectedly bright. Because the roof was leaking, sunlight shone through the cracks and into every corner. There was only a straw mat and a quilt on the ground. There were several large flat rocks in the corner with porcelain cups and pots placed on top of them. There was a small clay stove on the ground and a metal kettle sitting on top of it. There was water boiling inside. Qin Yining couldn't help but feel deep respect for such a great scholar who was willing to live in such a simple and crude place for the sake of the warships that the imperial court was about to destroy. After entering the straw hut, he bowed to LV Yun as a woman greeting her elders. Mr. LV is so devoted to the country. This concubine truly admires you. Please accept this concubine's bow. Xia Yu and Su Weiji also bowed again with sincerity. Hearing this, LV Yun couldn't help but be moved. She quickly reached out to support them. Wang Fei, you don't need to be so courteous. This is what this old man should do. This old man still has to thank Wang Yi for his help. Otherwise, this ship might not be able to stay. As they spoke, they sat down around the large rock. LV Yun took out a porcelain kettle and a handful of tea leaves from a small clay pot. She carelessly brewed a pot of tea. This place is very simple and crude. Wang Fei, just treat it as a picnic. LV Yun poured tea for Qin Yining. Qin Yining quickly held the teacup with both hands and said with a smile, "Many thanks, Mr." Xia Yu and Su Weiji didn't dare to trouble LV Yun. They took the teacup and poured tea for themselves. They sat down again. Qin Yining went straight to the point. When this concubine came, Wang Yi had already explained the situation by the sea. Has Mr. chosen a ship to keep? LV Yun sighed softly. Her eyes were filled with sorrow and reluctance. To be honest, this old man really can't bear to part with a single one of those warships. It's a pity that the imperial court gave a decree, and the Ministry of Works arranged for people to start work. This old man can't stop it. I could only use my connections to quietly leave some newer and better warships parked on the side of the harbor. Even if they were to be dismantled, they would be dismantled on the inside. These workers are dismantling the ships one by one. Half of the 100 warships have been dismantled already. When LV Yun spoke to this point, she shook her head and sighed. And pointed in the direction of the city, for us to start work. These old fellows who have protected this part of the sea and the mountains and rivers are not dead yet, but their ships are about to be dismantled. Qin Yining sighed, there is no other choice. A villain is slandering us, and your majesty has given a decree. It is impossible not to dismantle them. Fortunately, we have other countermeasures. In any case, we can do our best to preserve some. Yes. This is the fire, and the hope of the Dezhou Navy in the future. When LV Yun spoke to this point, she changed the topic. When does Wang Yi plan to make his move? LV Yun's question was vague, but Qin Yining could already read LV Yun's meaning from her eyes that seemed to have seen everything clearly. This old man was truly a wise man. Perhaps he had already guessed something. Qin Yining would not directly hand over the topic to others. He smiled and said, if there are no accidents, we will choose to make our move tomorrow evening. Do we not have to make some preparations beforehand? Preparations? LV Yun smiled. Since Wang Fei has made arrangements for everything, this old man will not interfere with Wang Fei's preparations. This old man does not know anything. I just came here to enjoy the sea breeze and look at the warship. Hearing her say this, Qin Yining was naturally satisfied. LV Yun was a smart person. She had already guessed that they could not protect the warship for no reason. They would use the warship to do something, but she did not ask in detail. Therefore, people without curiosity could be safe in the court. It is good that Sir LV has such a refined interest. The sea breeze is strong and humid. Sir LV should take care of your body. Yes. This old man plans to leave in a bit. They chatted for a while more before Qin Yining respectfully bid farewell. After Qin Yining left with his people, LV Yun came out of the straw hut. She looked at the warship docked at the dock not far away and the workers tearing it down in full swing. Her gaze gradually became complicated. She did not know if Prince Zhongshuan's actions would be able to protect the warship. She heard that Your Majesty had found the whereabouts of the treasure and had already left the capital. She only hoped that Your Majesty's attention would be focused on the treasure and not concern herself with this matter. I did not expect Sir LV to be so amiable and approachable. Xia Yu sighed with emotion as she walked by the sea. Su Weiji smiled and said, Sir LV is a smart person. Since he has already asked Wang Yi for help and agreed to Wang Ye's conditions, he naturally will not do anything unnecessary. She turned to look at Qin Yining. We will begin tomorrow night. Should we tell them to be ready at any time? Yes. Qin Yining's expression became serious as he said, when we return, have Sir Liao bring the people he found over. We will leave the inn early in the morning tomorrow. Yes. The two of them nodded in response. The night passed uneventfully. The next morning, Qin Yining and his group left the inn early in the morning. Everyone was in charge of their own matters, and everything was proceeding in an orderly manner. When night fell, the workers at the docks were still busy dismantling the ships in full swing. A few lanterns were hung up high. In reality, they were not very useful on the large docks, but the cold waves on the surface of the sea were extremely beautiful. In a corner where no one could see, a few small boats were slowly approaching the warships docked at the periphery of the docks under the cover of darkness. One by one, the figures of people boarded the more than 30 warships. Immediately, someone lowered the ropes and lifted the heavy crates onto the two largest warships. After the boats left the docks for another 15 minutes, a strange gust of wind suddenly blew by the shore of the docks. It swept away a lantern on the table next to the work shed. The candle and the lantern quickly lit the straw shed to the side. With the help of the wind, the straw shed and the straw shed were set ablaze. It's on fire. It's on fire. The workers who were dismantling the ships usually lived in the work shed at night. Today, they did not get off work, so they were not in danger. However, they still had some luggage and bedding in the work shed. Now that their living quarters were on fire, they did not have time to dismantle the ships. They hurriedly ran to the work shed to put out the fire. Who would have thought that as soon as they left the docks, the pile of wood that was piled up on the side of the docks caught fire. It was swept away by the sea breeze and also set ablaze. The fire quickly spread and swept through the entire docks amidst the fierce wind. Heavens! It's a natural disaster. At this time, the workers and the supervisor did not care about anything else. Everyone hurriedly ran away from the docks. They only saw the wood and the docks burning. Soon after, the warships that were tied together by ropes at the docks were set ablaze one by one. What should we do? The local county magistrate who heard the news rushed over. He saw that the warships were set ablaze and the entire docks were engulfed in a sea of fire. The damp wood burned and thick smoke billowed out. It was as if they had fallen into hell. The county magistrate's legs went soft and he knelt on the ground. Chapter 1053. The entire Golden Harbor was in a state of chaos. The people from the Water Dragon Bureau hurriedly rushed to the harbor, but the raging fire stretched for miles. The wood piled up at the harbor and the docked warships were engulfed by the fire. They had no idea where to start. The people of Golden Harbor were alarmed. They panicked and looked at the sea from the cliff at the end of the town. They had never seen such a huge fire in their entire lives. Even the sky was dyed red by it. The connected warships were burning. The sea breeze roared. The sea surface was also burning for some reason. It was as if a huge dragon was burning. Thick smoke billowed and covered the sky. Some of the people were worried. Some wiped their tears. Some knelt on the ground and kowtowed to the gods, praying that the people of Golden Harbor would be safe. They prayed that the heavens would stop punishing them. They must have dismantled the warships. Even the heavens don't agree. An experienced elder angrily held onto his walking stick. Someone else said, "We didn't cherish our warships. That's why the heavens want to take them back. They won't be used by the people of Dezhou. What should we do?" A woman cried. The local magistrate looked for paper and pen with trembling hands. He reported to Your Majesty that the warships were on fire for no reason and the entire harbor was engulfed in flames. Perhaps it was a warning from the heavens. The magistrate didn't want to be labeled as a failure, but he seemed to have forgotten that he cared about the heavens. The heavens sent a warning and burned the warships that he wanted to build the imperial mausoleum. Could it be that the heavens were dissatisfied with him as the emperor? The magistrate couldn't think about these things for the time being. No one noticed that after the fire and thick smoke, more than 30 warships of various sizes slowly left the harbor and headed southeast at full speed. No one noticed that a small donkey was carrying an immortal-like old man and leaving Golden Harbor under the cover of the night. They were heading in the direction of the capital. Your Majesty, Your Majesty. In the Huichuan County Yamen, Li Qitian was being helped by Xiong Jinshui to change his clothes. He heard a rough and urgent voice outside. "There's an urgent report from Golden Harbor." Li Qitian frowned. He casually ordered, "Back off." Then he strode to the front hall. He saw a man in a tight suit standing in the middle of the ground with a worried expression. It was none other than the secret agent, Zhu Meng. "What's the matter?" Li Qitian casually sat down. Zhu Meng presented the memorial and the secret report together, then lowered his head and carefully retreated to the side. When Li Qitian saw Zhu Meng's cautious appearance, he knew that something must have happened to Jin Gang. He first opened the secret report sent by the spy, and his expression changed greatly after a glance. Then, he opened the report sent by the Golden Harbor County Magistrate, and his face turned ashen as he fiercely slammed the table. What warning from the heavens? Whose warning was it? Were those trash all eating rice for free? I only asked them to dismantle a few ships, but they actually burned down the entire pier. What use do I have for this group of trash? Your Majesty was so angry that Xiong Jinshui and the palace servants all knelt down in panic. From what he heard, Jin Gang caught fire and burned down the ships Your Majesty used to build the imperial mausoleum. Xiong Jinshui felt that something bad was going to happen. Li Qitian was so angry that he was walking around in circles, panting heavily. Trash, a group of trash. What use do I have for you all? He walked to the table and waved his hand, causing the ink, paper, and inkstone on the table to fall to the ground. The blue and white porcelain brush fell to the ground and shattered, and the water inside spilled all over the floor. Your Majesty, please quell your anger. Everyone kowtowed. Li Qitian roared, "Quell my anger. How can I quell my anger? I only wanted to build an imperial mausoleum. First, I was greedy. Then, I used shoddy materials to buy stones. Now, all the wood has been burned down. You said it was a warning from the heavens, but what did I do that required a warning from the heavens? I love the people like my own children, and I work hard every day, not daring to neglect them in the slightest. Even if it was a warning from the heavens, it was telling me not to forgive you bunch of mediocre people. Your Majesty, please quell your anger. Everyone kowtowed again. Li Qitian was panting like an ox. He gritted his teeth and said, investigate thoroughly. Why would there be a fire at the seaside for no reason? There must be something fishy about this. If you can't find out the reason and insist that it was a warning from the heavens, I will kill everyone at the docks and bury them with my wood. Yes. Zhu Meng accepted the order and quickly retreated. Li Qitian then gave a few more orders, ordering people to investigate the situation at Jingang as soon as possible. After waiting for 2 hours, he found someone to ask how many ships were left. When he heard that all the ships at the docks had been burned down, Li Qitian angrily smashed the 4 treasures of the study he had just brought. Li Qitian didn't avoid people when he was angry, so the guards outside the door vaguely heard the commotion. Although they didn't dare to spread rumors, there was no guarantee that these sounds wouldn't be heard by other people. For example, Tang Xiao, who served Pang Xiao. Pang Xiao was currently recuperating in the rear courtyard of the yamen. When he heard the news from Tang Xiao, a smile appeared on his slightly pale face for the first time in several days. With such a big commotion, Sister Yi must have safely boarded the ship with the treasure. No one would have thought that the treasure would be on the warship of the previous dynasty, carried by his darling and far away from Li Qitian's search. Tang Xiao saw Pang Xiao smile and couldn't help but lower her voice. She joked, Wang Yi is secretly happy to have such a virtuous wife like Wang Fei. Pang Xiao's sword-like eyebrows rose and he also said in a low voice, you brat, you've grown bold. If Wang Fei heard this, she wouldn't be willing to marry Ji Yun to you. Tang Xiao's young and delicate face immediately turned red. When Pang Xiao saw this, he couldn't help but smile comfortably. Everything was going well. His injuries should be gradually getting better. This would prevent him from being delayed when he needed to do something in the future. Tang Xiao happened to hear these words. But the imperial bodyguards didn't dare to spread the news. When Lu Heng received the news that something had happened at Golden Harbor, it was already 3 or 4 days later. Count, the people on the streets are saying that a huge dragon flew to Golden Harbor a few days ago. First, it breathed fire to burn the warships. Then, it blew a gust of wind that made it impossible for people to go close to put out the fire. That fire dragon lay on the surface of the sea until the sun rose and all the warships were burned to ashes before it flew into the clouds. Lu Wenru had been asked by Lu Heng to return to his side because she was used to serving him. When she heard the news outside, she hurriedly came to report. When Lu Heng heard this, he put down the book in his hand in shock. Fire dragon. That's right. It can breathe fire and blow wind. The people at Golden Harbor have made it sound like a god. This lowly one also heard it from the people on the streets. The warships were all destroyed. Lu Heng frowned. Lu Wenru nodded, yes, it is said that not a single warship was left. Even the dismantled wood on the shore was burned. Fortunately, there were no casualties among the people. The fire at the docks did not spread to the city. The fire has already been extinguished. Chapter 1054. Lu Wenru was taken aback by Lu Heng's question. He carefully thought about Your Majesty's recent actions and said with a bitter smile, why do I feel that Your Majesty seems to have been bewitched? For the sake of the treasure and the imperial mausoleum, he's gone crazy. Lu Heng nodded, he's firmly seated on the throne and has deep expectations for the future. The people place great importance on the glory of the deceased. Naturally, he's anxious to build the imperial mausoleum. However, he's too impatient and too confident in his absolute rule over the Dezhou dynasty. He's forgotten about the people's hearts and what the officials care about the most. The officials want to be promoted and get rich. This is human nature. However, no one is willing to constantly be at the side of a tyrant. Even Prince Xiongxuan, who has outstanding military achievements, was treated like this by your majesty, let alone the ordinary civil officials. The Son of Heaven leaving the capital for no reason has already shaken the hearts of the court. In addition to the news of Pang Zhao's treatment and the fire dragon incident at Golden Harbor, the already unstable hearts of the people will become even more unstable. If I'm not wrong, your majesty will depart for the capital in a few days. Lu Heng took a sip of tea and said slowly. Lu Wenru's heart skipped a beat. He said worriedly, Count, your majesty will probably deal with the matter of the treasure when he returns to the capital. I don't know if your majesty believes you. If Prince Xiongxuan finds something wrong with us and your majesty blames us, what should we do? Lu Heng smiled and didn't immediately respond to Lu Wenru's words. When he talked about Pang Zhao that day, it was nothing more than using the resources of the aristocratic families and your majesty's suspicion of Pang Zhao to buy himself some time. Do I have to stay and wait for death? Lu Heng smiled faintly. He picked up the teacup and focused on drinking tea. Lu Wenru paused for a moment and then understood everything. He was a bit worried that Lu Heng would abandon him at a critical moment. After all, if there really was a time to escape, Lu Heng shouldn't have the time to care about others under heavy pursuit, right? However, Lu Wenru had served Lu Heng for many years and felt that he knew many of Lu Heng's secrets. If Lu Heng didn't bring him along, he would be afraid that he would leak the secret, right? Or would he kill him? When Lu Wenru thought of this, all of his hairs stood. He only wanted to be a follower and didn't want to be involved in these matters. Lu Heng seemed to see through Lu Wenru's worries and smiled. You should prepare well for the next few days so that you can set off. These words were too ambiguous, scaring Lu Wenru into quivering. Seeing him like this, Lu Heng could not help but burst out laughing. What are you thinking? Do you think I'm the kind of person who's only to escape? Don't worry, even if I don't bring Madame Bien, I will bring you. Lu Wenru wiped the cold sweat from his forehead and smiled bitterly. Uncle, don't make fun of this lowly one. Lu Heng shook his head. How is this making fun of you? It's just for the sake of the Lu clan's peaceful future. As the head of the Lu clan, I've never forgotten the importance of the clan. That's right, how's the matter I asked you to do? Lu Wenru immediately became serious and lowered his voice. It's done. We're just waiting for the news. Good. Then you'll stay by my side for the next few days and do as I say. Lu Heng smiled and nodded. A fire-breathing dragon flew to Golden Harbor and burned down the docks, destroying all of the warships that your majesty wanted to build the imperial mausoleum. This news seemed to have grown wings and everyone in the capital knew about it. However, Li Qitian still wasn't appeased. More and more secret reports came in from 4 different places where the stone was transported. Those places didn't find any treasure. There were a total of 10 directions. Li Qitian stole 1, and of the remaining 9, 4 were confirmed to have no treasure. Li Qitian hoped that the remaining 5 would have results. After all, his treasury was already stretched thin. The limited silver had already been allocated to Lu Heng by the Ministry of Revenue a few days ago to buy new stone. Now that the warships were destroyed and the wood turned to ashes, he still had to find good wood. Wouldn't that increase his expenses? The silver was all in the stone factory. If something big happened that required silver, he wouldn't be able to find the money. Li Qitian's mouth began to blister overnight. Because of the rumors about the fire-breathing dragon at Golden Harbor, the capital also became restless. He also knew that it was a big taboo for the emperor to leave the capital, so he immediately ordered people to prepare to return to the capital. Xiong Jinshui asked, Your Majesty, Prince Xiongxuan's body hasn't fully recovered. The doctor said that Prince Xiongxuan really can't move around right now. May I ask if we should bring Prince Zhongshuan with us? Can't move around. Then have people carry him. Li Qitian sneered, even if we have to carry him, we have to carry him back to the capital. We still have things to ask him. Also, Lu Heng, all of you take good care of him. Don't let anything happen to Lu Boy. Xiong Jinshui hurriedly saluted, yes, this servant obeys the decree. This servant will do it right away. Xiong Jinshui left to the back of the yamen. He stood on the corridor and gasped for breath several times before calming down the panic in his heart. It wasn't that he was a coward. It was just that Your Majesty was in a bad mood these days. His mood was unpredictable. Yesterday, because a small eunuch accidentally spilled a drop of water while pouring tea, he was dragged out and beaten 20 times. He was always by Your Majesty's side, so he really didn't dare to be careless. He was afraid that he would be caught and punished severely. Xiong Jinshui felt that his face was about to become as bitter as Imperial Physician Gao's. However, he didn't dare to let others see his bitter face. In front of others, he was still the steady chief steward. On his way to the back of the palace, he crossed the courtyard and asked to see Prince Zhongshuan. Not long after, an attendant respectfully invited him in. Xiong Jinshui naturally didn't dare to be arrogant in front of Pang Xiao. Even if this person had been beaten by Your Majesty, he was still very afraid. This servant pays respects to Wang Yi. Wang Ye's complexion looks much better. Pang Xiao's hair was disheveled, and a dark blue robe was draped over his snow-white inner robe. When he heard this, he coughed weakly. With Tang Xiu's help, he leaned against a large pillow and sat sideways. Eunuch Xiong, there's no need to be so courteous. This king's body is probably ill, and he won't be able to recover in a short period of time. Eunuch Xiong has specially come. Does Your Majesty have any orders? Looking at Pang Zhao's pale face and pale lips, Xiong Jinshui gritted his teeth and said, Wang Yi, Your Majesty has already ordered preparations to return to the capital. He will depart tomorrow or the day after. He specially ordered the servant to inform you. He paused for a moment to size up Pang Zhao's complexion and said, there are many imperial physicians in the capital, and their medical skills are good. Wang Ye's body will be able to recover quickly when he returns to the capital, and he will be able to complete Your Majesty's task as soon as possible. Pang Xiao naturally knew that the last sentence was added by Xiong Jinshui himself. Even though Xiong Jinshui was one of Li Qitian's people, he didn't want to generalize and make things difficult for him. As a result, he smiled and said, many thanks, Eunuch Xiong. Since this is Your Majesty's decree, this king will definitely obey. I will order people to prepare and return to the capital with Your Majesty. He hadn't thought that Pang Xiao would be so easy to talk to. Xiong Jinshui was overjoyed. He thought that perhaps Prince Zhongshuan really wasn't as dangerous as Your Majesty thought. He happily accepted and then turned to deliver the decree to the Lu Fu. Chapter 1055. Pang Zhao's injuries from the flogging had not yet healed. When Xiong Jinshui was present, he naturally had to hold on for the sake of his face. As soon as Xiong Jinshui left, Pang Xiao threw away his outer robe, hissed, and carefully turned over to lie down. He hugged the big pillow with both arms and breathed a sigh of relief. How can we not go back? If we don't obey the edict now, we will be more certain that Your Majesty has thoughts about this king, and will be more certain that the treasure was hidden by this king. Your Majesty is sensitive and suspicious, and this king knows his temperament too well. Pang Zhao's voice was lazy, so the more it is like this, the more we have to do the opposite. Your Majesty has his reasons for suspecting this king, but this king also has his ways. Even if he did it, he could find a way to get out of it. Now that he was separated from his wife and children, missing Sister Yi, his 2 children, and his family every day, how could he not know who the culprit behind this situation was? Tang Xiu frowned and thought for a moment, and then suddenly understood. She nodded and said, Wang Ye's words are reasonable. In that case, this subordinate will go and prepare the luggage and the carriage, ready to follow your majesty back to the capital at any time. Pang Xiao nodded, have the bodyguards prepare as well. After we set off, send half of the bodyguards to protect your majesty. Tang Xiu was stunned. Wang Yi, are you afraid that someone will assassinate your majesty? That's not necessarily the case. But on the way back to the capital, we must always be prepared. Now that Dezhou was in turmoil, Li Qitian still needed to be alive to stabilize the situation. At least, he could stabilize the world, and the people could safely pass this hurdle for the time being. Thinking of the reports from the south, most of the granaries were in a state of emergency, and there were already people eating grass roots and tree barks to allay their hunger, and then looking at the luxurious life of the nobles in the capital, and your majesty's every move, which was focused on the treasure. Pang Xiao's originally happy mood became heavy. Although he had property, he still had an army in his hands to support, so he had to count Qiu Feishan's autonomy to balance his income and expenditure. Meanwhile, Sister Yi had also taken out most of her money to help the victims of the disaster. Moreover, feeding the people of the world should not be the responsibility of a single person. This was something Li Qitian should have considered. Now that he had just obtained the treasure, if he wanted to use it, he would have to avoid the limelight. He wanted to use the treasure to save more people. This was a good intention, but he would not put himself in danger because of this. Otherwise, wouldn't those who followed him be implicated? With so many subordinates, there must be a reason why they were willing to follow him. However, none of them would accept losing their lives for no reason. Pang Xiao closed his eyes and pretended to sleep, but he was calculating how to proceed in the future. Xiong Jinxue had already arrived at the Lu mansion and announced Your Majesty's decree. Lu Heng agreed without hesitation. After all, it was the emperor's departure, so there were a lot of preparations to be made. Li Qitian was hot-headed and led the troops to look for the treasure. Even if someone wanted to murder him, they would not be able to know his whereabouts immediately, so the journey was safe. However, he had already stayed in Huichuan County for many days. If he wanted to return to the capital without anyone knowing, it would not be easy. Therefore, this greatly increased the risk of Li Qitian returning to the capital. The bodyguards who were protecting the emperor were inevitably nervous at this time. Especially Ma Qing, when he learned that the emperor was about to return to the capital, he immediately began to make arrangements. He did not have a chance to sleep for 2 consecutive days, so he was so worried that some of his hair fell off. He had escorted the holy chariot out safely and was about to bring her back in one piece. If something were to happen right under his nose, he was afraid that even the lives of his entire family would not be enough to pay for it. After intensive preparations, early the next morning, the troops and the ceremonial guards were neatly lined up on the street in front of the yamen. The cavalry of the 5 military camps sat upright on their horses, guarding the ceremonial guards and the carriage on both sides, preventing the onlookers from approaching. On this day, the commoners were also curiously waiting around, craning their necks to see what Your Majesty looked like. They wanted to see if he was like what the storytellers said, with a square face, wide ears, eyes like copper bells, a height of 9 feet, and a sturdy back. He did not look like an ordinary person. Not long after, the yamen's door opened, and the chatter of the commoners suddenly stopped. Several bodyguards carried a door plank out, and a tall man with long legs was lying on top of it. He looked very weak. The commoners all knew that Prince Zhongshuan was beaten with a plank. Everyone was grateful that Pang Xiao had thought of a way to prepare rice for the commoners and taught some people how to plant terraced fields. However, the person who ordered Wang Yi to be beaten with a plank was Your Majesty, so everyone only dared to talk about it behind his back. At this time, everyone felt pity and sorrow in their hearts, but no one dared to say anything in front of him. Following that, a handsome young man wearing a brocade robe came out. Beside him was a beautiful young woman. Some people did not recognize him and asked the person beside them in a low voice, "Who is that?" "He's so handsome, is he your Majesty's brother or nephew?" The person who was asked clicked his tongue in disdain. "That's County Magistrate Liu Zhongyiba." "What are you thinking? What nephew? It was said that your Majesty only had one crown prince. He had brothers and nephews, but your Majesty had never put anyone in an important position." The current emperor was very afraid of the imperial family members taking charge of the affairs of the imperial court and whether or not they would seize power. The people who heard this began to whisper, "I didn't expect Zhongyiba to be so handsome." Of course, Zhongyiba is the head of the Liu family. What kind of family is the Liu family? They would obviously marry the most beautiful and talented wives, so their children would naturally not be bad. The people's voices rose and fell. Not long after, a bright yellow figure slowly walked out of the yamen. Seeing the eunuchs behind him and the guards of honor formed by the yellow umbrella and the eunuchs, the discussion of the people suddenly stopped. Everyone was curious to see what the emperor looked like, but now, they did not even have the courage to look at him directly. They all knelt down and shouted, "Long live the emperor!" For a moment, the sound of people shouting, "Long live the emperor," could be heard everywhere. Li Qitian saw his attendants and the people in front of the door all kneeling and kowtowing. Even Pang Xiao, who was leaning against the door, was the same. He was very happy. This was the sense of accomplishment that could only be enjoyed after unifying the country. This sense of accomplishment was something that could not be brought about by anything else. Li Qitian sat in the carriage, then raised his hand and waved outside, indicating for the people to get up. How could the people understand? They continued to kneel in place. Li Qitian did not mind. When Xiong Jinshui jogged over to inform Zhongyiba and Prince Zhongshuan that they had boarded the carriage, Li Qitian responded, "Let's set out." Then, he leisurely leaned back on the soft pillow laid out in the carriage. Xiong Jinshui loudly sang, "Your Majesty has decreed, set out. Set out." The accompanying cavalry of the 5 barracks immediately responded loudly. Their uniform roars resounded through the clouds, and their imposing manner was imposing. The people who had never seen fighting on the battlefield experienced the imposing manner of the cavalry of the 5 barracks. The people immediately shouted, "Long live your Majesty!" Chapter 1056. Li Qitian's good mood lasted for the whole day. When they set up camp at night, he was in a good mood and ate 4 pieces of meat. He also talked to Xiong Jinshui about the days when he led the troops to war and didn't even have a sip of hot water to drink. Xiong Jinshui was moved and sighed repeatedly about how difficult it was for your Majesty to establish the country. However, when he was woken up by a burst of heat in the middle of the night, his good mood was gone. Outside the tent, an orange flame had already lit up a corner of the snow-white tent. The air was filled with the smell of burning. Li Qitian rolled over and sat up. He grabbed the horsewhip and sword and rushed out of the tent. "There's a fire. Save His Majesty." In front of the tent, Xiong Jinshui didn't notice that your Majesty had already gotten up. He was still screaming for help. His voice was so sharp that it was hoarse. Li Qitian kicked Xiong Jinshui's butt. "Stop screaming. Come out with Shen." Then he grabbed Xiong Jinshui's collar and directly took him out. In the end, he was the founding emperor who was about to establish the country. He was naturally different from those weak emperors who had sat steadily for many years. A small fire couldn't startle him at all. The air outside the tent wasn't much fresher. Even the tents were burning. The fire startled the warhorses. The horses were all tied up and couldn't escape. Each and every one of them was neighing wildly. Some of the soldiers were anxious to save their horses. Some of them panicked and went to get water to put out the fire. In front of Li Qitian's tent, Pang Xiao was limping and leading people to put out the fire. He had his back to Li Qitian, so he naturally didn't see that someone had already rushed out. Ma Qing took a copper basin of cold water and poured it over his head. He turned around and wanted to rush into the tent. In the end, he bumped into Li Qitian face to face and almost knocked him into the tent. Li Qitian was knocked in the chest by Pang Xiao. For a moment, he couldn't breathe and his vision turned black. If Xiong Jinxue didn't push him in the back, he would have fallen down. Pang Xiao raised his head. His wet hair was still dripping. When he saw that Li Qitian was fine, he immediately shouted happily, "Big brother. Are you all right?" In a moment of desperation, he didn't even know how to address him as Your Majesty and directly addressed him as Big Brother. Pang Xiao was still wearing his white pajamas. His entire body was drenched and he was in such a sorry state. However, Pang Xiao had rushed in to save him. He was confused. Was he overthinking? Did Pang Xiao not have any intention of rebelling at all? Especially when he called him a big brother, it brought back many memories of the past. The two of them had supported each other and protected each other's lives. That was how they had achieved their current glory and wealth. They had survived so many difficulties, so why couldn't they enjoy wealth and wealth together now? Li Qitian sighed and stood up with the help of Xiong Jinxue and Pang Xiao. "We are fine." "Great." Ma Qing cheered and immediately said, "Just now, the fire suddenly flared up. Wang Ye's tent was burned down and he immediately rushed out to rescue Your Majesty. Fortunately, Your Majesty is blessed by the heavens and has the protection of the heavens. It's just that the fire's origin is really strange." The camp was in chaos. The soldiers were in a hurry to save the horses, and some went to the stream to get water to put out the fire. Some even took off their outer robes and carried water to put out the fire. They didn't have enough things to do, so they could only make do like this. Li Qitian held the sword and the horsewhip. With people protecting him on both sides, he felt much more at ease. Thinking of Jean Gang's words about the fire dragon and seeing the large camp now shrouded in a sea of fire and thick smoke, he felt a wave of disgust in his heart. He was the son of heaven and had the protection of the heavens. This fire naturally didn't start because of him. What warning from the heavens? It was simply nonsense. Someone must have set the fire. Li Qitian said gloomily. "Go." "Yes." Ma Qing cupped his fists and answered. Tang Xiu took a robe and put it on Pang Xiao. "Wang Yi, your injuries haven't healed yet. You still have a fever on the way. You have to take care of yourself." Pang Xiao's entire body was soaked. He was shivering from the cold, but he insisted on keeping up appearances. "I'm fine." Li Qitian thought of their friendship in the past, and his heart softened. "Shi, go change your clothes first." "Your Majesty, this subject is fine. This subject is strong and healthy. My body is fine." Li Qitian frowned. "If you fall ill, who will protect you? You won't even listen to my decree." Pang Xiao stiffened his neck and wanted to argue, but in the end, he shut his mouth unwillingly and turned to follow Tang Xiu to find clothes to change into. Li Qitian couldn't help but think of the day when Pang Xiao jumped high in front of him and argued with him. At that time, he was also so disrespectful and looked so repulsive. Today, he was still suspected of disobeying the decree, but he couldn't get angry. Perhaps he was really overthinking it. Thinking about it carefully, it was all because of that so-called Tian Jizi's comment that he had a grudge and gradually alienated Pang Xiao. However, thinking of the people's evaluation of Pang Xiao, thinking of the love and respect of the people for Pang Xiao, and most importantly, thinking of the admiration of many men in the imperial army for Pang Xiao, Li Qitian felt like he was sitting on pins and needles. If Pang Shao had the intention to rebel, he didn't need the tiger tally to dispatch troops and horses at all. He just needed to stand in front of the camp and shout, and hundreds would respond to his call. In the past, only the Tiger Army was like this. Now, the Southern Pingnan Army was also subdued by him. Such a powerful and popular person like him had even more support than himself. No matter whether he had the intention to rebel or not, as long as this person existed, he would always be a threat to his throne. Thinking of this, Li Qitian's heart, which had just been moved after being rescued, hardened again. Every man for himself, and the heavens take the hindmost. He was just trying to protect the throne and was afraid of his sworn brothers. He wasn't like the brothers of the previous dynasty who killed each other. What wrong did he do? While he was thinking, Li Qitian had been escorted to a spacious and quiet place by the stream. Pang Shao had also changed into a new set of clothes. However, because the fire was too intense, the luggage he had brought with him had been burned to ashes. At this moment, he was wearing a coarse short jacket that he had casually borrowed from a soldier. Pang Zhao's attendants and bodyguards were standing in the distance with their horses. The frightened horses were still faintly manic. Li Qitian looked at Pang Zhao's appearance, then turned to look around for Lu Heng's figure. "Where's Zhong Yibo?" Pang Shao was stunned by the question. "Your Majesty, this subject didn't see Zhong Yibo." Replying to Your Majesty, this servant also didn't see Zhong Yibo. Xiong Jinshui and Pang Shao said in unison. Li Qitian frowned. Ma Qing immediately said, "Could it be that Zhong Yibo and Madame didn't escape?" This time, Ma Qing panicked. He immediately rushed to Lu Heng's tent with his men. However, the tent was burned to ashes at this time, but there was no corpse inside. Zhong Yibo and his family were also not in the crowd. Ma Cheng's face immediately darkened. He reported this matter to Li Qitian. Li Qitian's heart burned with anger. He said in a low voice, "Go see if Zhong Yibo's carriage is still there." Ma Qing obeyed and immediately found that Zhong Yibo's carriage was still there, but the horse pulling the carriage was no longer there. Moreover, Zhong Yibo's attendants and family were no longer here. Chapter 1057. Pang Shao frowned. He stood in place and didn't say anything. However, Li Qitian was already fuming with anger. He waved the horsewhip in his hand angrily, whipping a dead tree on the side of the road until its bark flew everywhere. "Lu Heng, you bastard! He deceived me so badly. First, he hid the treasure, then he deceived me. Now, in order to escape, he wants to assassinate me. How dare he?" Li Qitian roared angrily. He was so angry that he was about to go crazy. "Your Majesty, please calm down." Pang Shao, Xiong Jinshui, and the others all knelt down. However, Li Qitian's anger didn't dissipate. Li Qitian looked at the chaotic camp in front of him, listened to the cries of the people who were putting out the fire, and then looked at the sorry state of everyone in front of him. He lowered his head to look at the sleeping clothes he was wearing. He simply couldn't suppress his anger. Lu Heng, that bastard, was simply toying with him like he was a child. He must have hidden the treasure long ago and deliberately used Pang Shao to distract him. He had used his family background as a threat, and he had also used his fear of Pang Shao, which he had never tried to hide. He was opportunistic. What was laughable was that he actually believed his words and gave him the opportunity to escape. Li Qitian even had a premonition that he might not be able to find the treasure in the remaining 5 paths. Because Lu Heng had already hidden the treasure. "Ah!" Li Qitian roared angrily. Everyone once again lowered their heads in silence. They didn't dare to react at all. When the fire was finally put out, the sky was already brightening. Ma Cheng's face was covered in dust as he replied, "Your Majesty, the fire has been put out." Fortunately, no one was injured. A few warhorses were burned, and some escaped because they weren't securely tied. Fortunately, the wind was weak yesterday, so the fire didn't spread to the nearby forest. Li Qitian snorted coldly with a sullen face. Ma Qing immediately lowered his head and didn't say anything. How could there be so many lucky ones? Li Qitian, as the emperor, had left the capital for the sake of the treasure, which had already been criticized by the people. Now, not only did he fail to obtain the treasure, he even caused a so-called natural disaster warning among the people. Before the rumor had died down, he encountered a fire on his way back to the capital and almost lost his life. In this situation, Li Qitian found it hard to dispel the gloominess in his heart. He simply couldn't think of any fortunate, because he simply didn't care how many casualties there were, whether the warhorses were burned to death, or whether the forest was set ablaze. Right now, he was only thinking about how he had lost face this time. It was simply too humiliating. Pang Xiao knew Li Qitian's thoughts the best. Seeing that Ma Qing still wanted to say more, he quickly gave him a wink. Ma Qing was stunned for a moment and then understood. He blinked at Pang Xiao gratefully and lowered his head, not daring to speak anymore. However, Xiong Jinshui was having a hard time at this moment. Wang Yi and the general didn't speak, so he could only brace himself and ask, "Your Majesty, did you send a letter back to the capital and send someone else to pick you up?" Not to mention other things, Your Majesty's belongings were all burned away, including the dragon robe and ceremonial guard. Do you want Your Majesty to quietly return to the capital in commoner's clothes with a dirty face? When the civil and military officials know that Your Majesty has left the capital, they will definitely come to pick you up. Xiong Jinshui couldn't imagine how the rumors would spread when the civil and military officials saw Your Majesty in a sorry state at the gate of the capital. How angry would Your Majesty be? Li Qitian obviously also thought of this. He looked conflicted and didn't know what to do for a moment. In addition, it was fine to send someone to pick you up or go back quietly. With so many people here, the situation here couldn't be hidden. If he tried to hide it, people might laugh at him for having a guilty conscience. But if he didn't hide it, people would say that it was a warning from the heavens. No matter what he did, it would be difficult. Seeing Li Qitian in such a difficult situation, Peng Xiao hesitated and said, "Your Majesty, why don't we continue our journey first? When we arrive outside the capital, order someone to quietly enter the city to prepare the items for Your Majesty's ceremonial guard. This time, you led the troops to suppress the bandits, which is equivalent to reenacting the battle formation of the past. In the past, when the troops returned to the capital, there was no reason for them to immediately enter the city. They had to wait outside the city for a day before entering the city. When the time comes, they will be stationed outside the city to give the civil and military officials enough time to prepare to welcome Your Majesty. As for encountering bandits on the road, Your Majesty will send people to eliminate them. When the fighting is intense, the bandits will be forced to commit murder and arson. I don't think anyone will have any other ideas about this matter." Pang Zhao's proposal made Li Qitian's eyes light up and his mood suddenly brighten. "You are still young and quick-witted." Li Qitian sighed. Pang Xiao scratched his head and said with a smile, "Your Majesty is in the prime of his life." It's not that he didn't think of it, he was just angry for a moment. Why was he angry? Of course it was because of Lu Heng's deception and assassination. When Li Qitian thought of Lu Heng, he gnashed his teeth and instructed Xiong Jinshui in a low voice, "Then do as Wang Yi says." Xiong Jinshui immediately complied. His admiration for Pang Xiao was as high as a mountain. In an instant, he was able to think of a way to solve the problem and appease Your Majesty. He was also able to slander Zhong Yibo at the same time. It was no wonder that such a person could become the only imperial prince of this dynasty with a different surname. Everyone set off again. Without the ceremonial carriages, horses, and carriages, they naturally traveled faster. When they arrived at the city gates, they set up camp and secretly ordered people to fetch the ceremonial robes. At this point, Peng Zhao's suspicions regarding the treasure were completely cleared. As for Li Qitian's anger towards Lu Heng, it was no surprise that it implicated the Lu clan and those related to the Lu clan. The imperial court was about to welcome a baptism. At this time, Qin Yining was standing on a warship. He used a monocular to look at the land in the distance. That's the Wanation. Liao Zhibing nodded. Yes, that's one of the Wanation's harbors. Our people disembarked from here last time. Near the harbors is Sichuan Yixing's famous water swamp nation. However, you also know that their nation is like a relatively large village in our world. Qin Yining nodded. Even so, they are the local tyrants. We can't underestimate them. Qin Yining turned around to look at the warship behind him. He thought for a moment and said, "Is the harbor there very large? Is it as large as Golden Harbor?" Gao Delay smiled honestly. A lion's head, the harbor there isn't as large as Golden Harbor. It can't accommodate so many warships. At most, it can accommodate 2 warships at a time. Xia Yu and Su Weiji understood what Qin Yining meant. They smiled and asked, "Princess, what are your plans?" Qin Yining smiled and said, "The 2 largest warships carrying the cargo naturally can't dock. We'll leave some reliable people to guard them. The rest of the warships should prepare to disembark. I'll take one of the warships with me and scout them out." "Princess, are you planning to personally disembark and meet Sichuan Yixing?" Xia Yu disagreed. "Princess, you have a high status. There's no need for you to personally make this trip. Why don't this old man go and meet him?" "That's right. This old man is willing to travel with Brother Xia. We're unfamiliar with this place, so it's best if Princess doesn't show up." Chapter 1058. Xia Yu and Su Weiji still wanted to persuade her, but Qin Yining's attitude was resolute. They also knew that the youth named Sakurai had died in order to save Qin Yining. Moreover, he had died at the hands of his own people. That kind of injustice and that kind of tragic death had become a thorn in Qin Yining's heart. With Qin Yining's personality, if she couldn't resolve this matter, she would never be at ease for the rest of her life. Therefore, the 2 of them didn't continue to persuade her. They only said, "Since Wang Fei has made up her mind, it's better to bring enough people ashore." "That's natural." Qin Yining turned around and smiled. "The 2 of you are very resourceful and good at judging the situation. You can stay on the ship to provide support. I will transfer to a smaller turreted ship later and bring enough guards. Sir, take the other warships further away and don't come close. Turn around and wait for my signal." Qin Yining took out a signal firework specially used by the Qin-Tian alliance. Xia Yu and Su Weiji immediately understood Qin Yining's meaning. They nodded and said, "Wang Fei, don't worry." Qin Yining nodded. She immediately ordered people to make preparations. She returned to the cabin and was helped by Ji Yun to change into a luxurious honey-colored brocade robe. She put on a Yang Fei-colored cloak with large sleeves. Her long hair was tied up in a flying immortal bun. She wore a set of gemstone head ornaments. Even the jade on her collar and skirt were of excellent quality. Qin Yining rarely dressed up in such a splendid manner. Naturally, she shone brightly. Ji Yun also changed into a bright maidservant's outfit. She supported Qin Yining and said, "Wang Fei, when we get ashore later, please don't leave this servant's side." Qin Yining smiled and nodded in agreement. She turned to instruct Liao Zhibing, Jing Jie, and the other people accompanying her. "Later, we will call ourselves merchants from southern Yen. You are all my associates, so don't make a mistake in your address." Since there are people among us who can speak Japanese, there's no guarantee that there aren't people in Japanese who are proficient in Dezhou's language. Don't give yourself away. Yes. Everyone agreed without any hesitation. Seeing that Qin Yining had arranged everything so well that he had even changed his origin so as not to expose his identity, Xiaoyu and Su Weiji were very relieved. They stayed on the boat and waited for the signal. Qin Yining boarded the smallest ship in the group and slowly approached the port of the Water Pool Nation. On the shore of the harbor, there were many people drinking wine and barbecuing meat around a bonfire. Perhaps it was because it was rare to see such a magnificent ship approaching, but when they saw Qin Yining's ship, they were very alarmed. From the deck, Qin Yining could hear the Japanese people shouting and yelling. They were wearing sleeveless gowns and holding spears, aiming at the ship. Some of them were even wearing straw sandals, running back to report the situation. Qin Yining asked Gao Delay, "What did they say?" Gao Delay said, "They asked who we were and didn't allow us to approach the port. Otherwise, they would kill us without mercy." Qin Yining said with a laugh, "Tell them that we are merchants from the southern Yan kingdom. We don't have any bad intentions." Gao Delay nodded and stood on the deck and said these words loudly in the Japanese language. When the other party heard this, they didn't lower their guard. They all pointed their spears at the ship, as if they were facing a great enemy. "Madam, are we still going to dock?" Jingzhe asked. "Dock? Don't worry about them. Let's dock and get off the ship. Let's wait for their manager to come. I think someone has already gone to report the situation." The ship lowered its sails and slowly sailed into the harbor. The Japanese people couldn't help but retreat in panic, and their shouts became even more intense. After the ship lowered its plank, Qin Yining and Ji Yun got off the ship under everyone's protection. The Japanese people's shouts suddenly became softer. Qin Yining took a few deep breaths and said with a smile, "After so many days, we finally have our feet on the ground." Ji Yun also smiled. "To tell you the truth, this servant seasickness has been forcibly cured after coming out with Madam these past few days." Liao Zhibing, Jingzhe, Ji Das-hun, and the others all laughed. They saw the group of people standing on the dock, chatting and laughing. They didn't carry any weapons, and they didn't seem to have any intention of approaching. Moreover, the leader of the group was a beautiful woman who was dressed the most luxuriously, so the Japanese soldiers were a bit wary. Merchants. They didn't look like merchants, but more like nobles. After waiting for a while, Qin Yining saw a group of people escorting a man in a long robe over. This man was different from the other men who wore straw sandals. His robe had wide sleeves, and he wore wooden clogs. He looked to be in his 40s, and he had a calm demeanor. Every step he took was steady and steady. It seemed that he was a calm and resourceful person. When he arrived, he stopped 10 steps away from Qin Yining. He looked at Qin Yining from head to toe, and his eyes couldn't hide the astonishment in them. He spoke in the language of the southern Yan kingdom. "Miss, this is Water Swamp Country. May I ask where you are from? What business do you have with our Water Swamp Country?" Dezhou and Dayan languages were similar, but the accent of the south was naturally different from the north. This Japanese man spoke in the dialect of the southern Yan kingdom. Although his pronunciation wasn't accurate, it was clear that this person had personally visited the Yan dynasty. When northerners listened to the Dayan language, they had to put in a bit of effort to understand it. Moreover, this Japanese man's pronunciation was a bit awkward. For a while, people from Dezhou, like Ji Das-hun, didn't know what was going on and were on guard. Fortunately, Qin Yining was a native of the south. Liao Zhibing, Jingzhe, and the others were born in the Yan dynasty, so they were very familiar with the language of the Yan dynasty. Qin Yining smiled brightly and stepped forward to return the greeting. She spoke in the dialect of the southern Yan kingdom, "Greetings to this sir." This young girl is a merchant. I have come out to sea this time to travel and do some business. I heard that Water Swamp Country is the most prosperous place in your country. Moreover, the great name is very hospitable and the people are kind and wealthy. Thus, I have specially come to disturb you. I hope that this sir will be able to accommodate me. Qin Yining's voice was already very gentle, and she spoke in the dialect of the south. In addition to her beautiful appearance and beautiful smile, to a man, her beauty was comparable to a sword. And it just so happened that the man who had come to receive her was someone who was very fond of beautiful women. He couldn't hide the shock in his eyes, and his voice became much gentler. This one is Adachi Tadachi, and I am the #1 warrior under the great name. May I ask how I should address you? This young girl's surname is Sun, and my husband's surname is Yao. She immediately reported her and Pang Zhao's surnames. So Miss Sun is already married. Then I should address you as Madam Yao. Adachi Tadachi's tone was naturally to show off his understanding of the southern Yan kingdom. Qin Yining followed his advice and chatted with him. So Sir Adachi has been to the southern Yan kingdom before? I went a few years ago and lived in the country of Yan for 2 years. Later on, there were always wars over there, so this one returned to the country. So it was like that. Qin Yining nodded, but he silently cursed in his heart. Compared to your country where wars happen every 3 to 5 days, our country is already peaceful and prosperous. Chapter 1059. Adachi Manha's eyesight was top-notch, and even though he was 10 steps away from Qin Yining, he could still clearly see the pleading look in her eyes. If it was just a delicate and beautiful woman, he naturally wouldn't make things difficult for her. But this woman had so many attendants with her, and they were all southern Yan people. Many of them went to the southern Yan to make a living, not just in Water Swamp Country, but in the surrounding countries as well. Some of them would make a living in the southern Yan, but others would do things like bandits, leaving a bad impression on the southern Yan people. He didn't know if these southern Yan people would treat them as bandits and come to their country with other intentions. Adachi Manha narrowed his eyes, and his hand involuntarily went to the hilt of the sword at his waist. Ji Yun, who was next to Qin Yining, suddenly tightened her grip on her arm. Qin Yining's other hand, which was hidden in her robe, lightly pinched her thigh before she stopped. Qin Yining's other hand, which was hidden behind her back, waved at the people behind her. Jing Zhe, Liao Zhibing, Gao Delay, Ji Das-hun, and the others were very nervous when they saw the Japanese man holding the sword. Their muscles were tense, and they were already thinking of rushing forward to protect the princess if they failed. But after receiving Qin Yining's signal, they suppressed those thoughts and tried their best to relax their bodies, even squeezing out relaxed smiles on their faces. Qin Yining's entire body was relaxed, without a trace of vigilance. She didn't know any martial arts, so naturally she was relaxed. After a short test, Adachi Manha discovered that the beautiful woman didn't know any martial arts, and the people behind her looked like ordinary workers. Perhaps they knew some martial arts, but overall, their chances of winning against the 200 or so Water Swamp Country soldiers weren't high. Thinking of this, Adachi Manha calmed himself down. He wanted to make a good impression in front of the beautiful woman, and perhaps even get a chance to get intimate with her. He put a smile back on his face and nodded, saying, "All right, Lady Yao, you and your subordinates can come to do business, but where are the goods you brought? I need to check to see if there is anything harmful to our Water Swamp Country. If there is no problem with the goods, you can come and do business." Madoha Adachi said as he looked at the ship docked at the harbor. That ship was still half new, and it looked extremely imposing. To be able to own such a ship and wear such luxurious attire, a merchant must be a very wealthy person in the southern Yan kingdom. Adachi Tatsuya had personally been to the southern Yan and had seen the prosperity of the big cities there. He had also seen how the wealthy merchants lived there. That was a life that was even more luxurious than their reputations. Not to mention that the water swamp country had more than 200 soldiers. There were more than 100 maids and servants in the rich merchant families there. Perhaps this Madame Yao came from such a wealthy merchant family. Such friends were worth making. This would bring him more benefits than just a chance to get intimate with her. Qin Yining's face was full of smiles, and her bright eyes reflected the sunlight from the seaside. Her jewelry and luxurious clothes made her look even more beautiful. Her eyes seemed to contain stars as she looked at Adachi Tatsuya with a smile. While he was in a daze, she had already seen the struggle in Adachi Tatsuya's expression, the change in his expression, the calculation in his eyes, and the wild ambition in his eyes. Qin Yining was angry for a moment. But in addition to her anger, she was also glad that she had met such a person today. When a person had something to ask for, they would also have a weakness, which she could use to her advantage. Otherwise, it would be much more difficult to get things done. She would not forget why she had crossed the ocean to come here. She wanted to achieve her goal, not to be treated with courtesy by a stranger. Qin Yining thought of this and nodded with a smile. Of course I can inspect it, but it's just some of the daily necessities of the southern Yan kingdom. There are women's rouge and face powder, cloth, wine, bacon, and other things. Qin Yining smiled and gestured for Adachi to board the ship. She was obviously inviting him to board the ship for inspection. Adachi Tatsuya's expression did not change, but his heart was palpitating. He stepped closer to Qin Yining and took in her beauty. Qin Yining led him to the boat and signaled for Liao Zhibing and the others to stay where they were and wait. She only brought Ji Yun and Jing Zhu with her. Liao Zhibing, Ji Das-hun, and the others' hearts were in their mouths. They secretly estimated whether or not Ji Yun and Jing Zhu could handle Adachi Tatsuya. Adachi Tatsuya saw that Qin Yining only had 2 attendants, 1 male and 1 female, and followed her to the boat. Looking at her graceful back as she boarded the boat, his heart became more and more excited. When the wooden boat stepped on the wooden planks, Adachi Tatsuya's broken southern Yan language came from behind. Lady Yao, how could your husband bear to let such a beautiful woman like you go out to do business? Qin Yining's footsteps did not change, but his face was filled with anger. For a man to say such words to an unfamiliar woman, it was clear that he wanted to take liberties with her. Even Ji Yun and Jing Zhou almost turned around to take this person down and apologize to the princess. Qin Yining turned around first and said with a smile, "A merchant's family does not have as many rules as those wealthy families. My husband and I went out at the same time. He went to the north, so I came here. So that's how it is." Adachi Tatsuya smiled and said, "It seems that your family is not so strict with women. When I was in southern Yan, there were very few opportunities to see wealthy women like you. They did not go out, only commoner women went out." Qin Yining smiled and said, "I am a commoner woman." Up close, this woman's appearance was even more captivating. Adachi Tatsuya's heart was beating like a drum. He was even more nervous than when he was competing in martial arts. He really wanted to leave a good impression in front of this woman. Seeing that she was so easygoing and talkative, it was clear that she did not hate him. Qin Yining led Adachi Tatsuya to a cabin that had been prepared in advance. Inside were the goods that they had brought out to sea. Just as she said, there were some ordinary items from southern Yan. As for the weapons and other items, they were on the other 29 warships, which were still far away from here. Adachi Tatsuka wanted to leave a good impression on Qin Yining so that they could have a good relationship in the future. Therefore, with Qin Yining by his side, he only briefly checked the goods in the box and did not go to the other cabins. Moreover, his burning gaze always fell on Qin Yining as they walked. Ji Yun and Jing Zhu were angered by Adachi Tatsuya's rudeness. However, they had important things to do and could not move, so they could only follow orders. Liao Zhibing and the others stood at the dock and looked at the ship anxiously. When Qin Yining and the others came out safely, they could finally relax. When they came back to the dock, Qin Yining smiled and said, "Mr. Adachi, you have checked. Can you allow us to do business here?" Chapter 1060. Qin Yining's watery eyes flashed and she smiled. "In that case, would like to thank Mr. Adachi. I would like to ask Mr. Adachi to do me the honor and allow this little girl to treat you to a meal." Adachi Tatsuya was overjoyed and nodded repeatedly. "Mrs. Yao came from afar, I should be the one treating you. You can leave your men here to move the goods. You can come with me for a stroll." In a moment of desperation, Adachi Tatsuya's tone became tough and domineering, even saying such a request like stroll. If it wasn't for the urgent matter and Qin Yining's clear priorities, she would have ignored Adachi Tatsuya, who was both overbearing and inexplicably confident. However, coming to a foreign land and being able to meet a person with a weakness, wasn't this also a kind of luck? Qin Yining smiled faintly. "Since Mr. Adachi invited me, I also want to go to your country for a stroll." Adachi Tatsuya was full of joy and thought to himself, could it be that this beauty is also interested in me? Is she interested in my tall and mighty figure? His back became even straighter. Qin Yining turned around and ordered Liao Zhibing, "Shopkeeper Liao, bring some men here to move the goods." She pointed to Gao Delay, Jing Zhi, Ji Dashun and Ji Yun, "You all come with me." If it wasn't for the presence of outsiders, Liao Zhibing would definitely stop Qin Yining and wouldn't feel at ease letting her walk around the city. However, at this time, Qin Yining had already made a decision and he didn't want to be wishy-washy to avoid arousing Adachi Tatsuya's suspicion. Shopkeeper Liao nodded with a simple and honest smile, "Don't worry, boss." He then turned around and ordered Qin Yining, Jinghu Wei and the other silver-masked spies, "Men, boss has ordered us to unload the goods, everyone get busy." Everyone could only comply and move the goods. Adachi Tatsuya didn't forget to carefully observe while admiring the beauty. Seeing everyone busy in full swing, his suspicions about the people in front of him decreased a lot. Qin Yining, accompanied by Ji Yun and Gao Delay, left the pier with Adachi Manba. At Adachi's command, the Water Swamp Country soldiers returned to the bonfire and continued to drink and barbecue. However, the topic of conversation changed to the young woman who left with Lord Adachi, as well as the goods on the dock. Away from the seaside, after walking through a winding mountain road, they saw a large field and a neat village. At the end of the village, a slightly imposing building could be vaguely seen on a hill. There were soldiers guarding the hill. "This is Water Swamp Country," Adachi Tatsuya said proudly. "This large piece of land is ours." He pointed at the cluster of houses. "That's the market." Qin Yining was amazed, but he was cursing in his heart. This place is even smaller than Huichuan County, but it can be called a country. It seemed that what Mr. Liao said last time was not an exaggeration. Adachi Tatsuya led Qin Yining in front, followed by Ji Yun and the others. Behind them was Adachi Tatsuya's entourage. The group of people wearing luxurious clothes slowly walked down the slope and along the path to the market, attracting the attention of many people working in the fields. Qin Yining noticed that most of the people working in the fields were women wearing cross-collar robes. Their hair was tied up with cloth towels, and long strips of cloth tied their wide sleeves and clothes, revealing their strong arms and calves. They were barefoot and bent over in the fields. Most of the children didn't have any clothes to wear, only a few had a vest. They were all naked and tanned, helping their families do what they could. The air was filled with the fragrance of grass, and she could vaguely hear people talking in a language she didn't understand. From the looks of it, this place was quiet and beautiful. This was Sakurai's hometown. Sure enough, whether it was in Dezhou or here, without looking at the ambitious people in power, the simple people were lovely. Chin Ining smiled and looked at the peaceful scene around him. Adachi Tatsuya became bolder and directly looked at Chin Ining's appearance. Seeing her peaceful smile, he couldn't help but ask, "Does Mrs. Yao like it here?" Chin Ining smiled and said, "Your country is very good." Adachi Tatsuya laughed happily, "This is just the countryside. You will see better things when we go to the market later." Chin Ining just smiled and nodded. Someone heard Adachi Tatsuya's laughter, and the nearby people bowed to salute. When they saw the strange woman dressed strangely and luxuriously beside Adachi Tatsuya, they thought that she might be a famous guest, and all of them bowed their heads deeply. Even though Chin Ining was a princess, he was not used to receiving such a big salute from an elder, so he was not used to it. This made Adachi Tatsuya even more certain that the woman in front of him was indeed a wealthy merchant, and not a noble of Southern Yen. If she wasn't a noble, she wouldn't have anything to do with Southern Yen, and they could accept their people doing business in water swamp country. The market was indeed more lively. The architectural style here was different from Dezhou's, and most of the doors here were horizontal sliding doors. But other than the different languages, Chin Ining didn't think there was much difference. Adachi Tatsuya led Chin Ining to the largest tavern. He first lifted the dark blue curtain, then turned to Chin Ining and said with a smile, "Mrs. Yao, please come in." Chin Ining smiled and nodded, then followed him in. Adachi Tatsuya took off his clogs and stepped on the wooden floor, then walked inside to wait for Chin Ining. Chin Ining thought for a moment, then explained with a smile, "Mr. Adachi, please forgive me. Our Southern Yan's custom is that women cannot casually take off their embroidered shoes outside." Adachi Tatsuya naturally knew this custom. Although he was a little disappointed, he waved his hand and said, "Mrs. Yao is a guest, please do as you please." Chin Ining smiled and nodded, then led Ji Yun and the others into the tavern. Gao Delay, Jing Jie, and the others stood on one side of the hall with Adachi Tatsuya's entourage, while Ji Yun followed closely behind Chin Ining. When the tavern owner saw that it was Adachi Tatsuya, he immediately came forward to greet him with a very humble attitude. Adachi Tatsuya exchanged a few words with him, and the rest of the customers in the tavern were all asked to leave without any complaints. Soon, the hall quieted down. Chin Ining came to a table in front of the window and knelt down. Adachi Tatsuya said a few more words to the tavern owner, and the owner responded one by one, then quickly retreated after bowing. Adachi Tatsuya sat cross-legged opposite Chin Ining and said with a smile, "I just ordered a few dishes. You don't mind that I made the decision for Mrs. Yao, right? You already made a decision, and now you're asking." Chin Ining smiled and said, "It's okay, I've just eaten, and I just want to follow Mr. Adachi here to take a look." Seeing that Adachi Tatsuya's eyes lit up, Chin Ining sneered in his heart. He put on the face of a businessman and said, "I wonder where in the market can I buy cloth, tea leaves, and rouge, face powder, and other businesses." Adachi Tatsuya was a little disappointed. It turned out that she was here for business, not to walk around with him. Chapter 1061. Adachi Tatsuya smiled and said, "That's easy. I'm the most trusted samurai by the daimyo's side. As you can see, everyone here knows me. If I can help you say a few words, it won't be a problem for you to do business." Chin Ining smiled and nodded, but didn't answer immediately. Seeing the strong desire and calculation in his eyes, Chin Ining lowered his eyes and thought quickly, then replied ambiguously, "Mr. Adachi is really a warm and hospitable person." Adachi Tatsuya was a little disappointed that the other party didn't flatter him. But on second thought, if this woman was really someone who could be obtained so easily, she wouldn't be so precious. At this time, Chin Ining smiled and said, "This is my first time in your country, so I don't know much about the local customs here. I'd like to hear about the strange things here. I wonder if Mr. Adachi is willing to explain to this little girl." In order to show that he was knowledgeable, Adachi Tatsuya immediately started talking to Chin Ining. At this time, the tavern owner came with his daughter holding a tray. The dishes, wine, tableware, and other things were placed properly one by one. Ji-yun knelt behind Chin Ining worriedly, worried that the food was poisonous. Especially when she saw Chin Ining generously raise the clay cup and take a sip of the food in the cup, she was so scared that her whole body tensed up. When Adachi Tatsuya saw that Chin Ining was very confident in his food, he was even more sure that the other party was just an ordinary businessman. Moreover, the topic of their conversation revolved around business, so he completely believed in Chin Ining's identity. Adachi Tatsuya talked a lot about the local customs and drank a lot of wine. After a while, he talked about the heroic deeds of the daimyo and how he looked down on the countries. At the same time, he took the opportunity to brag about his position as the #1 samurai by the daimyo's side and how brave he was. He felt that this Madame Yao's husband might be a typical thin and weak man in the southern yen. How could such a man satisfy such a beautiful woman? She should like a strong man like him. Therefore, Adachi Tatsuya boasted about the battles he had participated in the past. Finally, he said, the former #1 ninja by Ishikawa daimyo's side was defeated by me in just 3 moves. Hearing this, Chin Ining's heart skipped a beat. He asked calmly, if that's the case, then the #1 ninja is just an ordinary person. How can he be worthy of staying by the daimyo's side? That's right. Therefore, Sakurai was later exiled by the daimyo. Ha! Adachi Mitsuya laughed proudly. It was indeed Sakurai. Chin Ining blinked curiously. Banished? That's right. At that time. Adachi Tatsuya paused for a moment before returning to his normal state. Sakurai ignored the daimyo's orders and secretly tried to assassinate the daimyo, which almost caused a war between the two countries. Ishikawa daimyo was so angry that he tied Sakurai to a wooden board and banished her to the sea. After so many years, I'm afraid he's already been fed to the fish, ha ha ha. Adachi Tatsuya drank the wine, and his voice became louder and louder. His laughter passed through the wooden wall and into the street. Chin Ining lowered his eyes to hide his thoughts. Just as he was about to open his mouth to compliment Adachi Tatsuya, hoping that this person would reveal more, he heard a sneer coming from outside the door. Then he saw a tall and thin young man wearing a half-open gray-blue robe and wooden clogs slowly walking in. When the young man walked, he revealed his sturdy and thin calves under his long robe. His feet were clamped with wooden clogs, and every step he took was light and graceful. The long hair tied behind his head swayed gently as he walked. There were 2 slender swords, one long and one short, at his waist, but they were firmly held by his arms when he crossed them. As soon as Chin Ining saw this young man, he couldn't help but think of Sakurai. Perhaps many years ago, when Sakurai was still highly valued by Ishikawa Yasushi and was still very healthy, she was thin but full of vigor and vitality. Naturally, there was a kind of arrogance and aloofness about her, handsome and cold. The young man looked at Adachi Tatsuya and said a long series of words in a mocking tone that Chin Ining couldn't understand. Gao Delay, who was behind Chin Ining, pursed his lips anxiously, as if he wanted to get closer to Chin Ining but didn't dare to do so immediately. Adachi Tatsuya was still proud, but when he heard the young man's words, he immediately became angry. He stood up and said a few words to the young man in neon. The young man's tone was still mocking, but Adachi Tatsuya was getting more and more irritable. Chin Ining couldn't understand what they were arguing about and couldn't help but be a little impatient. Suddenly, he heard a familiar sound from the young man's mouth. Silly Cry was Sakurai's name. Even if he could remember everything wrong, he couldn't remember the pronunciation and writing of Sakurai's name wrong. This person knew Sakurai. Chin Ining looked back at Gao Delay behind him and asked with a questioning look. The two didn't communicate, but Gao Delay immediately understood Qin Yining's meaning and nodded without a trace. Qin Yining immediately understood. The one who was arguing with Adachi Tatsuya should be Sakurai's friend, Hiragana. She was also a ninja around Ishikawa daimyo and was very famous here. Qin Yining lowered his eyes and suppressed the thoughts in his heart. Adachi Tatsuya and Hiragana had developed to the point of almost drawing their swords. The tavern owner and the owner's daughter were scared and hid in the corner, looking like they wanted to persuade but didn't dare. Qin Yining's mind turned quickly and suddenly laughed. "Mr. Adachi, please don't be angry, don't ruin today's mood because of an ignorant person." She suddenly spoke, breaking the tense atmosphere between the two of them. Both Adachi Tatsuya and Hiragana looked at Qin Yining. At this time, Hiragana also saw Gao Delay behind Qin Yining, and his face changed. He was about to speak, but he immediately reacted, tightly pursed his lips, and then looked at Qin Yining, who was dressed up. Qin Yining looked at Adachi Tatsuya and said with a smile, "Don't you want to drink with this little girl?" Adachi Tatsuya gritted his teeth. He still had feelings for the beauty, and he really didn't want to lose face in front of others. He couldn't beat Hiragana, and if he really lost face, how could he regain his dignity in the future? Thinking of this, Adachi Tatsuya sat down, waved his hand, and said something to Hiragana. Originally, he thought that Hiragana wouldn't give up. Every time they met, Hiragana was like a mad dog, insisting on a duel. If he didn't accept, Hiragana wouldn't give up. But today, when he said this, Hiragana just snorted coldly and turned away. Adachi Tatsuya was very surprised, but he also secretly rejoiced. Qin Yining held his sleeve with one hand and held the pot with the other, and poured a glass of wine for Adachi Tatsuya. "Mr. Adachi, who was that rude person just now? Why did he come to trouble you for no reason?" Adachi Tatsuya held the wine poured by the beauty, and for a moment, he drank it all in one gulp, only to taste the fragrance in his mouth. Chapter 1062. So that's how it is. Qin Yining smiled. Since Mr. Adachi is the #1 samurai by the daimyo side, why would you be afraid of such a small character? He just had to teach him a good lesson. So that he won't bother you in the future. Adachi laughed. "You don't know, but I'm much older than him. Besides, I'm the #1 samurai. If I agreed to compete with him, wouldn't I be bullying the weak? I don't want to lower myself to his level. In the words of the southern Yen country, I'm being magnanimous." Qin Yining couldn't help but admire him. Mr. Adachi is indeed knowledgeable and magnanimous. This little girl admires you. Ha! You're too kind. Adachi became more and more excited after being praised by the beauty. During this meal, Qin Yining didn't eat much and didn't say much. However, Adachi kept talking in order to please the beauty, telling her a lot of truths and lies about the big and small matters of the water swamp country. After the meal, Adachi brought Qin Yining to do business personally and successfully helped Qin Yining close several big and small business deals. Of course, even if they didn't speak the same language, Qin Yining could see that Adachi was using his power to pressure people. Small businessmen generally didn't dare to say anything. Qin Yining took advantage of Adachi's vanity and praised him at appropriate times. In the end, Qin Yining became impatient with this person, but he had to be patient and get along with him, so he didn't speak much. He only looked at him with admiration at appropriate times. But Adachi Tatsuya felt that the two of them had made great progress. Qin Yining's gaze towards him was automatically interpreted by him as affectionate. When night fell, Adachi smiled and asked, "It's already late. Why don't you stay in my house for a while?" When he invited, he looked at Qin Yining with burning eyes full of desire and excitement. The people behind Qin Yining had already seen through Adachi Tama's crooked thoughts. They weren't surprised to hear him say this, but they still felt angry. Ji Yun cursed in her heart. If Wang Yi was here, would he still allow this fellow to continue chattering? I would have twisted his head off and kicked it like a ball. Qin Yining's patience had long since run out. He pretended to be tired and smiled. Thank you for your kind intentions, Mr. Adachi, but it's really inconvenient to disturb your residence. This little girl plans to return to the ship to rest. As she spoke, her bright eyes blinked. Adachi immediately saw the servants following behind her and felt that he had grasped the crux of the matter. Today was the first day they met, and there were so many people around her, so it was not convenient. Madame Adachi did not continue to pester her. She smiled and said, "Then I'll send Madame back." "Sir, you've had a long day. How can I trouble you again?" "It's not tiring at all. You're so beautiful. What if you encounter danger while walking at night? It's better to have me by your side." Qin Yining ground her teeth and smiled shyly. In fact, this little girl doesn't really want to come out in public. It's just that I'm forced to do business. If I can sell my silk as soon as possible, I will be able to travel around here freely. Silk. Adachi Tama subconsciously said. Silk was not something that ordinary people could afford. Even the most noble may not be able to afford to wear a few pieces of silk from the Yen dynasty. Qin Yining said with a smile, "That's right. Among the things I brought, silk is the most important one. If I can't sell the silk, I won't be at ease. When I return home, I won't be able to explain to my husband." So this was what she was afraid of. Adachi Tatsuya felt that the relationship between them had already advanced by leaps and bounds, and the beauty throwing herself into his arms was just around the corner. Even if it was to fight for more time with her before she returned to China, he should find a way to help her sell the silk. Thinking of this, Adachi Tama said proudly, "It doesn't matter. I'll go see the daimyo tomorrow. The daimyo has many beautiful women around him. There are also many noble women in our water swamp country. I believe they will all like the silk you brought. Of course, the premise is that the price is fair." Qin Yining stopped and looked at Adachi Tama with admiration. "Of course, the price will be fair. Mr. Adachi, thank you very much." "You're welcome." Adachi Tama waved his hand proudly. "I'm the #1 warrior by the daimyo's side. This is just a matter of a few words. You can rest assured." Adachi Tama sent Qin Yining back to the dock. The two, reluctantly, said their goodbyes, and then Qin Yining returned to the ship. Adachi Tama turned back and said to the guards at the port, "You must not offend Mrs. Yao. You must give her the greatest convenience." Afraid that Qin Yining didn't understand, he turned around and told Qin Yining in the Yen dynasty language that he had arranged everything properly. In return, he received a grateful smile from the beauty. After Adachi Tama left with satisfaction, Qin Yining returned to the cabin with an unchanged expression. As soon as he entered the door, he spat with a gloomy face. "A toad wants to eat swan meat. That's right. That guy's thoughts are written all over his face. He wants to curry favor with the princess. It's simply wishful thinking." Ji Yun was so angry that he spat several times. Qin Yining said, "But fortunately, it was such a lustful thing that made our matter go so smoothly. If it was someone else, I wouldn't have the opportunity to meet the daimyo so quickly." So the princess said that she wanted to sell the silk in order to make him take the initiative to introduce you to the nobles. "Yes." Qin Yining nodded. Ji Dashun scratched his head. But why didn't the princess directly reveal her identity as a noble in southern Yen and ask to meet the daimyo directly? Based on the daimyo's previous actions, he should be a sinister and cunning person. He should have offended a lot of people. If someone from a foreign country asked to meet him, why would he immediately agree? Even if he met him, he would be very cautious. Maybe when I mentioned Sakurai, it would immediately lead to a siege. And I originally wanted to investigate what happened to Sakurai, but now it seems that Mr. Liao's investigation was correct. He didn't wrongly accuse the daimyo of Ishikawa. Also, I think that Hiragana's hatred towards Adachi Tama is due to Adachi Tama's contribution. I want to see the daimyo of Ishikawa with my own eyes and confirm with him what he is thinking now. At least when he's not so cautious, he won't directly attack. Everyone nodded in understanding. Gao Delay said that Hiragana already recognized me today. He didn't expose us on the spot. He probably wants to observe us. I think he will find a chance to meet you and ask clearly. What does the Alliance Master mean? Just tell him the truth, except for my identity. Gao Delay immediately nodded and said, I understand. Qin Yining was tired from the day. After washing up, he went to rest. Chapter 1063. Jingzhi, Xiao Shui, Liao Zhibing, and Gao Delay didn't sleep at all. When night fell, the four of them lit a deathly wind and waited on the deck, either standing or sitting. Jingzhi and Xiao Shui were the most alert. Even though they didn't hear any footsteps, their alertness as spies allowed them to immediately sense that someone was approaching. The two of them quietly walked to the side of the ship. Under the illumination of the light and moonlight, they saw a thin figure dressed in black with a sword in his hand. He was crouching like a black panther on the beach, avoiding the guards who were fast asleep and quickly approaching. Just by looking at his hand, they knew that this person wasn't any weaker than them. The two of them immediately turned around and whispered to Liao Zhibing and Gao Delay, someone's coming. Tell them to be on guard. As they spoke, the person was already in front of them. The four of them were on guard. After a soft sound, they saw an iron claw hook onto the bow of the ship. Then, there was a slight rustling sound. In the blink of an eye, the black figure scurried onto the deck. The four of them were immediately on guard, as if they were facing a great enemy. The black figure jumped onto the bow of the ship and immediately saw that the four of them had surrounded him. He was shocked. However, when he saw Gao Delay and Liao Zhibing, he let go of his sword and pulled down the black cloth covering his face. The person who came was Ping He. Gao Delay hurriedly whispered to Jingzhi and Xiao Shui, don't do anything. This is Sakurai's friend. Master said that he would come, and he really did come. Jingzhi and Xiao Shui didn't completely let down their guard. Their postures and positions were still very guarded. They could explode and subdue him at any time. Ping He also keenly sensed the hostility between the two of them. She narrowed her eyes and looked over. Gao Delay hurriedly whispered in Japanese, these two are our master's guards. They're so guarded because they don't recognize you. He turned around and said to Jingzhi and Xiao Shui, this isn't the place to talk. Let's talk inside. Jingzhi and Xiao Shui hesitated for a moment, but when they remembered Qin Yining's instructions, they had no choice but to step aside. Hiratsuchi followed Gao Delay into the cabin while being surrounded by a few people. The lights in the cabin were bright and the lobby was spacious. At this time, the guards who had received the news had rushed over. However, they did not show themselves immediately. Instead, they stood in the shadows. Liao Zhibing said, ask him what he's here for. God asked about the Japanese food. Ping He Kai stopped looking around and said with a tense body, the woman I saw in the tavern today is the new owner of Xiuming. How could she be on good terms with that shameless Adachi? If it wasn't for Adachi Toshiba's cunning plan, Daimyo wouldn't have betrayed Xiuming. Gao Delay said, our ship had just docked when we met that Adachi Mamba. Do you think we want to deal with him? That Adachi Mamba's eyeballs are almost hanging on our master's body. Our master came here to bury Sakurai in her hometown. He can't let all his efforts go to waste. He can't even go ashore. That's why he had to pretend to be nice to Adachi Mamba. Ping He Kai was stunned and said with surprise, "Aren't you a merchant ship? I see that you've been busy doing business. Business is just a cover. If our master didn't want to repay Sakurai for saving his life, why would he abandon his family and travel across the ocean to come here?" Ping He Kai heard this and immediately became respectful. She sighed and said, "Xiuming finally found a master who won't let him down. Your master is worth trusting." She lowered her head deeply. God and Ping He Kai exchanged these words in Japanese. Therefore, God had to explain to Liao Zhibing, Jingzhi, and Xiao Shui. The tense atmosphere between the two sides disappeared. God invited Ping He Kai to take a seat. However, Ping He Kai said, "I want to see your master." "Is it convenient?" "You want to see my master?" "Yes." Ping He Kai nodded heavily. She then said, "I want to know what happened to Xiuming." God then told Liao Zhibing and Jingzhi. Jingzhi said, "Madam should be willing to see this young man. Madam is a very loyal person. She would definitely be willing to see Sakurai's friend. Otherwise, she wouldn't have come here. But it's already late." Liao Zhibing hesitated. Xiao Shui said, "Madam won't mind." Thinking about how Qin Yining had to deal with Adachi Tatsuka for so long in order to successfully land in water swamp country, he knew that she wouldn't mind. Xiao Shui stood up and said, "I'll go ask Madam to come out." Everyone nodded. God then asked Ping He Kai to take a seat and went to get tea. Ji Yun was resting outside Qin Yining's bedroom. When she heard footsteps approaching, she immediately jumped up and scolded in a low voice, "Who is it?" "It's me." Xiao Shui said, "Ping He Kai is here. He wants to see Madam." Qin Yining had already woken up when Ji Yun spoke. Hearing this, he sat up and said in a slightly hoarse voice, "Ask him to wait for a moment. I'll be right there." "Yes." Xiao Shui responded and quickly went to the main hall. Ji Yun lit a lamp and helped Qin Yining change his clothes. After a simple tidying up, Qin Yining quickly walked out with the lamp. Just as she reached the main hall, she heard a few people talking with a Japanese person with God's help. That person's clear and young voice was very familiar. It was the person she met at the tavern. Xiao Shui at the door noticed Qin Yining and smiled. "Madam is here." Everyone quickly stood up to welcome her. Qin Yining and Ji Yun entered one after the other. Their beautiful eyes landed on Ping He Kai and sized him up without hiding anything. Ping He Kai saw a beautiful woman in a honey-colored brocade robe walk in. Out of courtesy, he immediately lowered his head and did not look at her face. Qin Yining smiled. "Please sit down." God immediately translated this to Ping He Kai. Qin Yining sat at the head of the table while the others stood on both sides behind him. Ping He Kai sat in his original position. Seeing that everyone was respectful and loyal to Qin Yining, he became more curious about this woman. This woman must be an aristocrat. Ordinary women from merchant families would not have such an imposing manner. "Brother, what brings you here so late at night?" "Today at the tavern, I saw you sitting with that shameless Adachi Mamba. I thought you were his friend. But when I saw Mr. God and Mr. Liao standing behind you, I remembered the last time I met them. They brought Hideaki's ashes back to Water Swamp Country, hoping to bury him. However, they did not receive permission from the daimyo and were chased away by the people. At that time, they said that if their master knew about this, he would be very angry. So at that time, I guessed that you might be Hideaki's master." Hearing God translate Ping He Kai's words to her, Qin Yining couldn't help but say, "So his name is Sakurai Hideaki." With a sigh, Qin Yining slowed down and let God translate her words to Ping He Kai. Chapter 1064. Qin Yining told her how he met Sakurai in Danfu County, how he arranged for Sakurai to go to the field, how Sakurai rushed into the crowd to take her away, how he protected her to escape, and how he died for her in the end. He even told her how Sakurai was betrayed by philanthropist Wang and how philanthropist Wang ended up. Hearing Gao Delay's narration, Hitaka's eyes gradually turned red. That person didn't betray his faith. He will always be a person worthy of my admiration. But I let him down because of my cowardice. When he was being wronged, I didn't even dare to stand up for him. Standing up, Hitaka knelt down and saluted Qin Yining. Thank you for trusting Shuming, thank you for not giving up on him. I can feel that although he died for you, he died in peace. His lifelong loyalty was not betrayed. You didn't let him down. He died for a good reason. Qin Yining hurriedly helped her up. After all, I'm sorry for him. You did your best for him. You were more courageous than me. Hitaka said with shame, compared to you who traveled across the ocean to find this place to bury Shuming, I just said a few words. It was so easy, but I didn't do it. I didn't clear Shuming's name. Even if I killed myself, I wasn't qualified. After listening to Gao Delay's explanation, Qin Yining comforted her. This is human nature. You don't have to worry about it until now. Since you and Sakurai are good friends, you should know his character. He's not a calculative person. Even if he was betrayed again and again, he didn't lose his faith in the end. He won't care about this. His spirit in heaven can see that you're still regretting this, and his heart can't be at ease. Hitaka was still ashamed. I know your identity must be not simple. But I don't want to know your details. I only care about Shuming. What are you going to do next? Seeing that she understood, Qin Yining immediately relaxed, so she didn't have to think about what he said. When I came ashore, I met Adachi Manba. He had designs on me and my goods, so I went with the flow. He promised to help me promote the silk in front of the daimyo and the nobles. With his personality of showing off, he will definitely do his best. I plan to gradually find an opportunity to meet Ishikawa daimyo. When I have the opportunity to meet the daimyo, I will personally discuss the matter of Sakurai's burial with him. Hearing God's words, Ping Heping Kai shook her head and said, the chances of daimyo agreeing are very slim. Daimyo acted arbitrarily and loved to save face. Back then, it was the daimyo himself who ordered Shuming to assassinate him. However, something went wrong in the middle. The other party actually had something on Shuming. Shuming was also the daimyo's most important person. Facing the other party's questioning, coupled with the alliance of several other countries, the daimyo was afraid. So, Adachi Tatsuka gave the daimyo an idea and pushed Shuming out as a shield. Adachi Toshiba looks steady and polite, but he's actually very vain and jealous. His so-called title as the #1 samurai was obtained through improper means. He can't even beat me, but he's jealous of Shuming's skills and status in front of the daimyo. After defeating Shuming, he was like a fish in water in front of the daimyo, and his life was getting better and better. I was defeated by Shuming. All these years, I have always wanted to duel with Adachi. As long as I defeat Adachi, his title as the first samurai will disappear, and the people will not respect him as much as before. There is too little I can do for Shuming. I want to use this method to prove that Adachi Tatsuka is not as good as Shuming. As long as his martial arts skills are proven to be fake, can it prove that the words he accused Shuming in the past are also false? God told Qin Yining Ping Heping Kai's idea. Qin Yining nodded and suddenly asked, in your Ping's country, who is the most loved by the people? Who is the most capable of bringing a good life to the people? Is your daimyo truly wholeheartedly devoted to the people? If this was said in Dezhou, it would be considered treason. If anyone heard it, they would definitely label him as a traitor. It was the same here. As soon as God Delay's words fell, Ping Heping Kai's expression changed and she stood up. What do you mean? Qin Yining saw Ping Heping Kai become anxious and smiled faintly. I don't mean anything else. I am just concerned about the lives of the people. No matter who is the daimyo, as long as the people of the country can live a stable life, have land to grow, have food to eat, and peacefully reproduce, that is happiness. They don't need to live in fear every day, worrying about when war breaks out and they will lose everything. From what Adachi Tatsuke said, your Ishikawa daimyo is very fond of grandiose achievements and likes to dominate. That is why he recruited all the men, including the boys under the age of 10, into the army. Many wars that should not have been fought were fought because of his bravery and ruthlessness. After a single war, every family lost their children. Is this the kind of life the people of Water Swamp Country want to live? Although Ping Heping Kai wanted to tell the truth and clear Sakurai Hideaki's name, he was still Ishikawa daimyo's ninja. His loyalty to his master was a hurdle that he could not cross. Ping Heping Kai's expression darkened. What you said will not change my mind. I will not betray my master. God Delay translated these words, and everyone fell silent. This was another person who was as stubborn as Sakurai. It would not be easy to convince him to defect. Qin Yining smiled faintly. Then, isn't your choice to clear Sakurai's name a betrayal to Ishikawa daimyo? He racked his brains to come up with a good way to preserve his reputation. He exiled Sakurai to maintain his image, but you want to tell the truth to everyone. How much has Sakurai done for Ishikawa daimyo? He was once the #1 ninja of Water Swamp Country, an existence that was respected by the people. But Ishikawa daimyo framed him at a critical moment. Ishikawa daimyo's character, won't he be despised? If you want to tell the truth about Sakurai, Ishikawa daimyo's actions will be known at the same time. Isn't that betraying your master? God Delay listened to Qin Yining's words, and even his own translation into Japanese became tougher. Ping Heping Kai's expression turned serious, but the walls around his heart were faintly cracking. It was as if something was shattering in his heart. I will not betray my master. But you want to clear Sakurai's name. Doing so would be a betrayal of your great name. You can only choose one of the two. Chapter 1065. Qin Yining was amused by Hiragana's words. Why did these people always want to commit suicide? You're not even afraid of death, so why don't you have the courage to do something good for the people? Our loyalty isn't something you can understand. Hiragana said stubbornly. Qin Yining said, there's a saying in our country that goes like this: a fine bird chooses a tree to nest in. If you're loyal to a wise man, then you're not stupid. If you're loyal to a daimyo who cares about the people, then everything you do is for the good of the people. If you're loyal to a despicable person, then you're helping the evildoer do evil. Your daimyo betrayed his subordinates, and you used a despicable person like Adachi Tama. Birds of a feather flock together. What kind of person is he? Can someone like him really let the people of Water Swamp Country live a good life? Qin Yining took a deep breath and waited for Gao Desai to translate her words before continuing. Today, when I was in the fields, I saw many children helping their mothers and grandmothers. They didn't even have a single piece of clothing to cover their bodies. Their female elders were skinny and sturdy, and had completely lost their feminine beauty. Because they had to work non-stop, each of them were like thick tree branches. Their fields were heavier than the men's, because all the men, including the 10-year-old boys, were in the ranks of the soldiers. Perhaps they would lose their lives one day. This country needs men and women in order to have more children. Only then can it continue to reproduce. But think about it. If your country were to go to war a few more times, how many men would be left? Without enough men to fill the ranks of the army, when people attack again, won't the remaining women and children lose their lives? Qin Yining had observed for a whole day, and with the information that Adachi Tama and Hiragana had revealed, he had a clear understanding of Water Swamp Country's current situation. This Ishikawa Fusei was a vain, pompous, and despicable person. He didn't care about the people. He only cared about his own reputation. He didn't care about the people's gains or losses. He only cared about his image in the eyes of the other daimyos. He valued his reputation and pleasure above all else. How could a daimyo like that care about the lives of the people? How could they truly develop the Water Swamp Country? Given the current situation, it was only a matter of time before the Water Swamp Country walked down the same path as the Northern Ji Country and the Yen Country. They would be crushed by war, and their citizens would be forced to leave their homes. Only a small portion of them would survive, and they would have to endure the next natural disaster. What Qin Yining and Pang Xiao had always wanted to do was to let the people of the world settle down and live a stable life, so that they would no longer have to suffer the ravages of war and be exploited by corrupt officials. That was why Qin Yining couldn't help but talk to Ping He Kai about the current state of Water Swamp Country. Ping He Kai's heart started to waver, but he also looked at Qin Yining with caution. "Why are you telling me all this?" Qin Yining said leisurely, "I only have one goal, and that is to bury Sakurai in her hometown. If your Sichuan daimyo is willing to agree, then everything can be discussed. If not, I don't mind using force." "You?" Ping He Kai glared at him angrily. Qin Yining waved his hand, indicating for him to calm down. "If I use force, I will definitely avenge Sakurai. That Sichuan Kusei and Adachi Manha are not people worthy of forgiveness. If they die, won't your country fall into chaos? I'm only saying this to analyze the current situation of Water Swamp Country from an outsider's perspective. I'm not a citizen of Water Swamp Country, so I don't need to worry about your future. I'm just saying this in passing. If you have the heart to prepare now, then you can use this chaos to give your people a better life. If you don't have the heart to protect your master, then when the time comes, I won't go easy on you." Everyone was stunned by Qin Yining's words. Gao Delay wiped away the sweat on his forehead, and explained everything to Ping He Kai. Ping He Kai's face turned red, and the veins on his forehead bulged. He gritted his teeth and said, "Aren't you afraid that I'll tell the daimyo about this? You won't have a chance to do anything. Do as you wish. That is, if you want to betray Sakurai Hideaki again." Qin Yining stood up with a smile. His eyes were burning, and his aura was imposing. "I'll say it again. I just want to bury Sakurai and let him return to his roots. I want to end his regrets. I don't care about the price he has to pay for this. Whether or not you tell the daimyo about this, I won't change my mind." Ping He Kai gritted his teeth. He had never seen such a domineering woman. Her words were so frightening. His heart was struggling fiercely. Should he help Sakurai, or protect the daimyo? Should he protect his own beliefs, or should he think about the people of Water Swamp Country? Qin Yining looked at Ping He Kai's expression and slowly said, "I've already explained my intentions. It's getting late, so please help yourself." When Gao Delay told Ping He Kai what she had said, Qin Yining nodded slightly, got up, and walked to the cabin. Ji Yun, Jingjie, and the others naturally followed Qin Yining out. The people hiding in the shadows also quietly retreated. Liao Zhibing and Gao Delay remained in place, not knowing what to do. Qin Yining's words today had quite the impact on them. They didn't expect the Alliance Master to make such a decision. But when they thought about it carefully, the Alliance Master was indeed someone who would do something like this. Gao Delay tried to persuade Ping He Kai. "You don't have to rush to a decision. Think it over carefully. You've already regretted not speaking up for Sakurai for so many years. Think carefully before you make this decision. Otherwise, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. Ping He Kai snapped out of his daze and nodded. He covered his face with the black cloth with a serious expression. After bidding farewell to Gao Delay and Liao Zhibing, he quietly left the junkyard. He didn't want to disturb the guards who were snoring on the shore. He quietly left the docks like a leopard cat. After Qin Yining confirmed that he had left, he returned to the main hull. Gao Delay said worriedly, "Alliance Master, what if he goes back and tells on us?" "He won't," Qin Yining said confidently. Chapter 1066. Realization dawned on everyone. Princess Consort, you're the most observant. Liao Zhibing hesitated. I still don't understand the Alliance Master's intentions. The Alliance Master can choose not to tell him these things, and we'll just do what we need to do. That way, there won't be any risk of the secret being leaked. That's right. Meng Qin agreed. If the Alliance Master doesn't say these things, he naturally won't tell on us. We'll just bury Sakurai and go back. Who cares what happens in Water Swamp Country? Qin Yining calmly said, I can choose not to tell him. But I think that Sakurai doesn't want to see the people of this land become homeless. Besides, we're leaving. Who will be able to pay their respects to Sakurai in the future? If this place becomes a battlefield, the lives of the people will be lost. Even if Sakurai is buried here, it'll be nothing more than a lonely grave. If I don't say these things, I can. If I say these things, I'll just give Hiragana a chance to prepare. As for whether or not he'll prepare, and what kind of preparations he'll make, it has nothing to do with us. Everyone fell silent. They could tell that Qin Yining wanted the people to live a peaceful life. She didn't want the people of Water Swamp Country to suffer because of Sakurai's burial. But if Ishikawa Daimyo really didn't allow it, they couldn't come here in vain. That was why she'd convinced Hiragana to find a daimyo who could help the people of Water Swamp Country. In the end, the princess consort had a soft heart. Ji Yun accompanied Qin Yining back to the cabin. Seeing her frown, she softly consoled her. Princess consort, don't worry. Don't worry about this matter. Perhaps Ishikawa Daimyo will agree to your request. Qin Yining took off her outer robe and sat on the edge of the wooden bed with her long hair spread out. The orange light shone on her face, revealing all her worries. For the sake of dignity, he definitely won't agree to my request. If he agrees to bury Sakurai, wouldn't that be admitting to his past mistakes? If someone doesn't let go of what happened back then and continues to investigate, his actions will definitely be exposed in front of others. Ji Yun's slender fingers twirled her hair. Hearing this, she froze. Doesn't that mean we'll have to fight? Not necessarily. Perhaps there would be a turn for the better. In any case, I'll have to meet with Daimyo Ishikawa first before I can consider my next step. That will depend on the ability of that 10,000 leaves. Ji Yun felt disgusted when she thought of how Adachi Manha coveted Qin Yining. If it weren't for the fact that Wang Fei still needs him, I really wish I could dig out his eyeballs. A breeze blew in from outside the porthole, and the candlelight in the room swayed. Qin Yining narrowed his eyes and said with a smile, there's no hurry. The night passed peacefully. Gao Delay and Liao Zhibing went out to gather information. Even though Qin Yining said that Ping He Kai would not betray them, they were still worried. However, before they could find out if Hiragana betrayed them, the news that Ishikawa Daimyo was going to invite nobles to a banquet spread like wildfire. When the two of them saw that there were quite a number of vegetable farmers and fishermen delivering vegetables, fruits, fish, and prawns to the luxurious mansion on the short mountain, they hurriedly returned to the ship. At this time, Qin Yining was receiving 10,000 leaves in the front hall. Mr. Adachi said that your country's daimyo wants to see me. Yes. 10,000 leaves straightened his chest. There was a hint of pride in his smile, but he suppressed the corners of his mouth and pretended to be profound. I told the daimyo that a friend came from afar and brought the precious silk of the southern Yen country. The beautiful concubines and noble women around the daimyo will be very interested in this. It just so happens that the daimyo hasn't held a banquet for a long time. Under my strong recommendation, the daimyo also became a little interested in you. So he specially asked me to invite you. Qin Yining didn't need to think carefully to guess what 10,000 leaves said in front of Ishikawa daimyo. It was nothing more than a series of words to recommend a beauty. Just thinking about it made him feel disgusted. Her beautiful face burst into a smile, and she said shyly, "This is not appropriate. This little girl is an ordinary merchant. The daimyo's status is noble. How can I be qualified to meet the daimyo with my humble background? It's better to entrust the sale of the silk to Mr. Adachi. I can directly give you 40% of the profits. In fact, if it wasn't for the long journey and my husband's request, I can give you even more." Qin Yining's tone was nervous. Obviously, he was frightened. Any person of ordinary status would be nervous when they were about to meet a big shot. Seeing her like this, 10,000 leaves was even more convinced of her identity. The 40% profit was enough to move his heart, but what moved him even more was the opportunity to be the guest of a beauty. "You don't have to be like this." 10,000 leaves smiled and patted Qin Yining's shoulder with his big hand. The touch of his hand made his heart ripple. "I'm here, you don't have to be afraid. Besides, in such a banquet, you can not only have fun, but also get to know more nobles and have more business opportunities. Are you afraid that you won't be able to understand the language? You don't have to be afraid. I'm here, aren't I?" Qin Yining used a lot of self-control to not slap this person's face. His hands clenched into fists in his sleeves, and he lowered his head shyly and retreated. "This is too much trouble, Mr. Adachi." "It's no trouble, no trouble. How can it be trouble for you?" Qin Yining looked up at 10,000 leaves Adachi. 10,000 leaves Adachi smiled elegantly. Qin Yining gritted his teeth and then smiled. "Since that's the case, I'll listen to Mr. Adachi." "That's right." 10,000 leaves Adachi smiled. "The banquet is in the afternoon. I'll pick you up then." He stood up and smiled. "You can prepare well and bring some of the silk you want to sell. It'll be good for the nobles to see." Qin Yining smiled. "Thank you very much." That smile was so sweet that it could dazzle people's eyes. 10,000 leaves Adachi's heart fluttered. He had already imagined many scenes in his mind when he succeeded and pressed the beauty under his body to do whatever he wanted. Qin Yining saw his expression and quietly sent him off the boat. When they were far away, Ji-yun said worriedly, "Princess Consort, why don't we send a signal now and ask Mr. Xia and the others to come over?" "That's right, Princess Consort." Jingzhe also said, "This time, we're going to meet Mr. Ishikawa. It might be unpleasant. I'm afraid that when the time comes, they'll gang up on us and we'll be in danger." Qin Yining shook his head. "We'll send a signal, but they have to listen to my instructions. Also, even if the negotiation fails today, Mr. Ishikawa won't directly do anything to us." They didn't understand and looked at each other. Everyone's eyes were filled with confusion. Chapter 1067. Everyone was enlightened when they heard this. They couldn't help but admire Qin Yining's meticulous thinking and bold decision. "I was just thinking that Princess Consort's move was too risky." So this was her consideration. Ji-yun frowned slightly. "But it's better to be safe than sorry," Qin Yining patted Ji Yun's shoulder and comforted her. Don't worry. After observation and questioning, I can conclude that Daimyo Ishikawa won't be calculative with a little girl like me. Even if he wants to make a move, he will only do it secretly. However, we won't give him the chance to do it secretly. Ji Yun nodded gently in the end. Although the others were also worried, they believed in Qin Yining's judgment. Liao Zhibing took the opportunity to report the results of today's investigation to Qin Yining. So, Hiragana probably didn't spread this news. Qin Yining smiled and nodded. Don't worry. Hiragana didn't fly into a rage yesterday. He won't have any reaction in the future. Alliance Master, you've thought this through. I'm still worried that Hiragana will reveal our secret in front of Daimyo Ishikawa. She wasn't worried. In fact, it didn't matter even if Hiragana revealed the secret. In the face of absolute power, any conspiracy was not worth mentioning. Qin Yining instructed everyone in a low voice and arranged what everyone needed to do clearly. Then, he and Ji Yun went back to their room to change and freshen up. Ji Yun hid the software at her waist and chose 2 bottles of Bing Tang to wear on her body. Qin Yining saw that she was so serious and only smiled. He didn't stop her. After a simple lunch, Jingzhe quickly walked in and said, Madam, Mr. Adachi is here. Qin Yining stood up and took a handkerchief to wipe his lips. After rinsing his mouth with tea, he touched up his rouge. Then, he brought Ji Yun, Jingzhe, Xiao Shui, and Gao Da out the door. Liao Zhibing and the others had already left the ship one after another and were quietly preparing to receive them. Adachi Tatsuha changed into a black robe with wide sleeves. His hair was combed and his beard was trimmed. When he saw Qin Yining disembark with his maidservants and attendants, his gaze was fixed on the woman in the silver robe. Today, she had changed into a light-colored dress, but her makeup was still bright and beautiful. Her luxurious jewelry added a bit of grandeur. If she were to tell him that she was a fairy who had descended to the mortal world, he would believe her. Adachi Tatsuya walked up to her. You look beautiful today. Qin Yining was disgusted by his gaze, but he smiled faintly. Mr. Adachi, you flatter me. Let's set off now, lest the great names and nobles wait for too long. Adachi Mitsuya nodded and waved his hand. Immediately, 2 people carried a small sedan chair over. The palanquins here were different from the palanquins Qin Yining took in the Great Zhou dynasty. The palanquins here were laid with chairs and mattresses. People had to kneel or sit cross-legged. The Great Zhou dynasty didn't set up benches for people to sit on, so the palanquins here looked like square boxes. Qin Yining did as the Romans did. He sat in the sedan chair and straightened his skirt. Ji Yun, Jingzhe, and the others carried a few pieces of silk and followed on both sides of the sedan chair. Adachi Tatsuha rode in front and led the way. He raised his chin proudly and accepted the greetings of the passers-by on both sides from time to time. Adachi Tatsuya inadvertently looked back at Qin Yining's attendants. Ji Yun, Jingzhe, and Xiao Shui were all clever. Jingzhe and Xiao Shui had been spies for many years and knew what to do at the right time. When they noticed Adachi Tatsuya's gaze, the 3 of them immediately put on a look of admiration, as if they had finally curried favor with a powerful person and were going to live the rest of their lives in luxury. Gao Delay's reaction was slow, but Ji Yun and the others' reactions were enough to please Adachi Tatsuya. It also made Adachi Tatsuya completely dispel his suspicions about Qin Yining. It seemed that the other party was indeed an ordinary businessman and wasn't faking it. Waterzay country wasn't big to begin with. Walking to the gate of the Great Name's residence was like taking a stroll around Donfu County. At this time, the wooden gate was open on both sides. There were already many horses and sedan chairs gathered here. Qin Yining's ears were filled with a language she didn't understand, but she didn't panic at all. She sat upright in the sedan chair and waited for the crowd to lessen before going out. However, Adachi Tatsuya didn't want to miss the opportunity to show off his abilities in front of Chin Yining. He got off the horse and threw the reins to the servant in front of the gate. Then, he personally led the sedan chair bearer forward. "I am Adachi Tatsuya's esteemed guest. How can I fall behind others?" The surrounding people were surprised to hear Adachi Tatsuya speak a language they didn't understand. Chin Yining's lips curled into a mocking smile. The moment the sedan curtain was lifted, he returned to his usual dignified self. "Madam Yao, we're here." "Thank you, sir." Chin Yining lowered his eyes and pretended to be shy. He just happened to avoid Adachi Tatsuya's hand and lowered his head to get off the sedan chair. Ji Yun and Jing Zhe immediately went to support Adachi Tatsuya from the left and right. Adachi Tatsuya glared at Ji Yun and Jing Zhe's backs with dissatisfaction. However, when Chin Yining stood still and looked up, he smiled warmly. "Madam Yao, please come in." Chin Yining nodded slightly and followed Adachi Tatsuya into the residence. At this time, many of the surrounding guests were looking at her curiously. Their eyes were filled with curiosity. Some people even gathered together and whispered, then covered their mouths and laughed softly. Chin Yining looked straight ahead and followed Adachi Tatsuya around the spacious courtyard. They walked onto a long corridor with a wooden floor. The courtyard was filled with green bamboos, pine, and cypress trees. The deer chase made a crisp sound. The clear sound of flowing water was very elegant. The courtyard here was interesting in a different way. Chin Yining walked to the entrance of the main hall, surrounded by greenery. Adachi Tatsuya raised his hand and gestured for her to wait. He then walked through the door. Ji Yun took the opportunity to whisper, "The other guests have also brought their attendants. Jing Zhe and I will follow you in." Chin Yining nodded slightly. When he saw Adachi Tatsuya coming out, Chin Yining's exquisitely made-up face broke into a smile. Adachi Tatsuya's footsteps paused, and his heart skipped a beat. He strode forward and said gently, "Madam Yao, Daimyo invites you in." Chin Yining nodded and turned around. "The two of you bring the silk and follow me in." Adachi Tatsuya's mind was focused on Chin Yining. He didn't have the time to see what kind of attendants Chin Yining had brought. Ji Yun and Gao Delay took the tray and followed behind Chin Yining and Adachi Tatsuya. Jing Zhe and Xiao Shui stayed in front of the door to provide support. Chin Yining's beautiful eyes swept across the main hall and took in the furnishings. The main hall was ventilated, and the floor was covered with thick straw mats. The guests were divided into 2 rows, and each of them had a square table in front of them. On the table were several exquisite dishes. In the middle of the main hall, a man dressed in a white robe with wide sleeves, bright red trousers, and an unknown tall hat was leaning lazily against a table. The man looked to be in the knowing destiny state. His eyes were sharp and fierce. Behind him knelt a youth with his hair tied up high. He held a long black sword in his hand. This should be Ishikawa Yusei. Chapter 1068. Midori Adachi knelt down and kowtowed. He said in Japanese, "Daimyo, the merchant from Nanyen has arrived." Ishikawa Kusei raised his eyebrows and looked at Chin Yining. "Oh. Is the silk she brought really that good?" "Yes. How would I dare to deceive Daimyo?" Midori Adachi slapped his fan. "I don't think her silk is that good. Are you interested in her silky skin?" As soon as he said this, everyone laughed. Even the noblewomen covered their mouths and giggled. They looked at Chin Yining as if they were looking at a rare toy. Midori Adachi's heart rippled. He quickly said with a smile, "No, I really want to introduce silk to Daimyo." He paused for a moment, then joked, "But I will know sooner or later whether or not her skin is like silk." His words caused everyone to roar with laughter. Gao Delay was very angry. He leaned over to Qin Yining's ear and whispered their conversation to Qin Yining. Qin Yining's hands clenched in her sleeves. She suddenly lost all her patience. Her purpose was to see Ishikawa Kasei. Now that she had seen him, Midori Adachi had lost his value. This perverted villain had impure motives from the beginning. Qin Yining had already reached her limit. She was here to do business, not to amuse these people. Midori Adachi saw that everyone was laughing. These people's expressions were too explicit. He was afraid of making the beauty uncomfortable. He turned back and said to Nan Yen with a smile, "Sit next to me later. I will definitely recommend your silk to all the nobles." He thought he could get a grateful smile in exchange for the beauty's smile. Who knew that this gentle and shy woman would look at him with a completely unfamiliar gaze? Midori Adachi was stunned. Even if he knew that the other party didn't understand Japanese, he knew what he had said to the daimyo. He couldn't help but feel a little guilty. "Mrs. Yao, you," Qin Yining smiled at Ishikawa Kasei. The other party immediately noticed the change in her gaze and aura. "Brother Gao, repeat my words to him. I'll say one sentence and you'll translate it." Gao Delay was already gritting his teeth in anger. Now that he agreed with anger, his voice was even louder than usual. "Sichuan Daimei, I am the daughter of a noble from Dezhou. Today, Mr. Adachi recommended me to meet you. It is truly a blessing of 3 lifetimes. I wonder if Ishikawa still remembers Sakurai Hideaki." Adachi Mamba's expression changed dramatically. He looked at Qin Yining in disbelief. "What did you say? Aren't you the wife of a merchant? How are you a noble?" Qin Yining raised her eyebrows and smiled. She had been with Pang Xiao for a long time, so naturally, she had learned some of his arrogance. At this moment, her aura was imposing, and she did not look like a merchant at all. There was no need for an explanation. He could see through her identity just by looking at her. Ishikawa leaned over and pointed at Adachi with his paper fan. "Do you know who she is?" Adachi Manba hurriedly knelt down. "Daimei, this woman told me that she is a merchant. She is using me." At this point, if Adachi Mamba still could not see that he was being used, then he was really stupid. Qin Yining ignored his murderous gaze and smiled. "Since Ishikawa Daimei is not replying, could it be that you don't remember Sakurai Hideaki?" Gao Delay repeated Qin Yining's words in Japanese. The entire hall was so quiet that even a pin drop could be heard. Adachi Mamba was covered in cold sweat. Ishikawa Daimei's veins were popping out on his forehead. "Woman, where did you come from? Men, chase her out." As soon as his voice fell, the samurai on both sides rushed forward. Qin Yining did not move. "Ishikawa Daimei is famous for his bravery. I didn't expect that you would be afraid of a woman saying a few words." The situation was urgent. Gao Delay did not wait for Qin Yining to finish speaking. He had already begun to translate, and his translation was accurate. Qin Yining said, "Sakurai Hideaki had been loyal to Daimei for many years. In the end, he took the blame for Daimei and died in a foreign land. I am his good friend, so I should bring him back to his hometown. Last time, I arranged for my men to send him here, but Daimei chased them out and did not allow Sakurai to be buried in his hometown. So this time, I came personally to talk to Daimei. In front of so many nobles and samurai, if Daimei avoids Sakurai's matter, it will be hard to avoid suspicion." As soon as Qin Yining's voice fell, Gao Delay also finished speaking. Ishikawa Daimei's face was ashen. His sharp eyes were like knives cutting Qin Yining's face. But seeing this woman's luxurious clothes and imposing manner, he knew that she was a noble from Dezhou. For a moment, he did not dare to directly make a move. But if he did not directly discuss Sakurai's matter, the nobles present would also stretch their necks to watch. Ishikawa Daime scolded in a low voice, "I don't know what you're talking about. If you're talking about Sakurai Hideaki, then he is a traitor to our water swamp country. He almost caused a war. If you want to bury him, then you have to make sure that his betrayal of water swamp country never happened. I will never allow him to be buried in water swamp country." As soon as Ishikawa Daime finished speaking, the crowd around him responded in unison. The man berated Qin Yining in a language that Qin Yining did not understand. Hearing this, Qin Yining's heart was in turmoil. Without any evidence, she could not make everyone believe her words, so there was no need to argue. Thinking of this, Qin Yining sneered, "I'll ask you one last time. Is Daime Ishikawa really not allowing Sakurai to be buried?" "Absolutely not." Ishikawa Daime stood up angrily. Everyone stood up with him and glared fiercely at Qin Yining. Ji Yun and Gao Delay, who were standing behind Qin Yining, tensed up. They were worried that they would pounce on them. Xiao Shua and Jing Jie, who had been waiting at the door, rushed in and stood behind Qin Yining. The atmosphere was tense. Qin Yining waved her hand, telling Xiao Shua and Jing Jie not to be nervous. She said solemnly, "Since Daime Ishikawa doesn't allow it, then please accept my challenge. Let's settle the issue of whether or not Sakurai Hideaki can be buried in his hometown through a duel. If you win, you can do whatever you want with me. If I win, please tell me the truth about what happened back then and clear Sakurai's name so that he can be buried in his hometown." Ishikawa Daime roared, "I won't accept your challenge. I'll kill you right now." Gao Delay's forehead was covered in sweat. He quickly whispered into Qin Yining's ear. Qin Yining smiled. So Daime Ishikawa's bravery was just a boast. The rumors were false. You don't even dare to accept a challenge from a little girl like me. I doubt that water swamp country will be able to develop and prosper in the hands of a cowardly rat like you. Ishikawa Daime flew into a rage when he heard Gao Delay's words. He kicked over the table in front of him. "I'll kill you right now." Chapter 1069. As soon as Qin Yining finished speaking, Gao Delay translated her words into Japanese. The hall fell silent, and only the sound of Ishikawa Fusei's heavy breathing could be heard. No one said a word. They all looked at Ishikawa Fusei, waiting for his reaction. In water swamp country, it was possible to refuse a duel, but if one refused, it would be seen as a sign of weakness. Not to mention the fact that the one making the request was a delicate woman. If the daimyo didn't even dare to accept a woman's challenge, he would be looked down upon. Hearing Qin Yining's taunt, Adachi Tatsuka drew his sword in anger. "You cunning woman! You deceived me, and now you're insulting the daimyo. I'll kill you. You told me that the people of water swamp country would listen to you and help me sell silk and goods. I promised you 40% of the profits, and you agreed to bring me to see the daimyo. It was a fair trade. Why are you calling me cunning now?" Ishikawa Fusei looked at Adachi Tatsuka suspiciously and angrily. Adachi Tatsuka's heart skipped a beat. He knew how suspicious the daimyo was. In the past, he had told the daimyo how famous Sakurai Hideaki was in the outside world and how he was respected. He also said that his ninjutsu was unparalleled, and that he could assassinate anyone if he wanted to. The daimyo had taken note of this and found a way to banish Sakurai. Now that this woman had said this in front of the daimyo, wouldn't the daimyo believe her immediately? Even if he didn't punish her immediately, the seed of suspicion had already been planted in the daimyo's heart. As expected, Ishikawa Fusei looked at Adachi Tatsuka with anger and blame. He was already convinced of his betrayal. Chin Ining said, "Ishikawa Daimyo, if you don't even dare to accept this woman's challenge, you'll become the laughingstock of the world. As the daimyo of a country, do you really not have the courage to accept this challenge?" Looking at the expressions of the nobles and samurai present, Ishikawa Fusei knew that he couldn't run away anymore. If he didn't even dare to accept this woman's challenge, where would he put his face in the future? Suppressing his anger, Ishikawa Fusei snorted. "Fine. I accept your challenge. When I win, I will definitely kill you and hang your beautiful head on the flagpole. I will let everyone see what the consequences of going against the great name are. Kill! Kill!" Everyone roared. It was as if he had already killed the person. Chin Ining was not afraid at all. After hearing Gao Delay's explanation, he immediately said, "Okay. Then I'll immediately go back and gather my men. We'll fight at the docks in the evening. I'll bring my men, and you bring your soldiers. Let's settle this once and for all. If you don't dare to come, then you are a coward." Ishikawa Fushing thought back to his subordinate's report, saying that there were only a few dozen people on the ship. They were definitely not a match for his 200 soldiers. Knowing what to do, he smiled proudly. Good. At that time, everyone would go to the docks to watch the battle. Everyone would be witnesses to who won and who lost. He must cut off this arrogant woman's head. Make her regret her rudeness now. Everyone roared at the same time, and their momentum was extremely shocking. Chin Ining had no intention of staying any longer. He turned around and walked out. Ji Yun and Gao Delay stood in front of her to protect her, while Jing Zhe and Xiao Shuai walked behind them. They swaggered out of the hall and went straight out of the mansion. The banquet ended before it even started. Everyone in the hall was still enthusiastic, but Ishikawa Fusei's expression suddenly changed. He viciously kicked Adachi Mamba's shoulder. "You traitor! Idiot!" Adachi Mamba was kicked and rolled on the ground. His face was red with shame and anger. After kneeling, he bowed his head and said, "Please listen to my explanation. That woman is too cunning. She deceived me." "Is that so?" Ishikawa Fusei turned around and asked, "Did Adachi Mamba help that woman sell her goods?" Hiragana, who had been hiding in the shadows, took a step forward and bowed her head. "Yes. Yesterday, I saw Adachi Mamba go out with that woman with my own eyes. Everyone on the street can testify. What else do you have to say?" "Daimyo. I was deceived." Adachi Mamba was so anxious that sweat appeared on his forehead. Who would have thought that such a beautiful woman would turn into a poisonous snake in the blink of an eye? Deceived? Do you think I'm as stupid as you? Ishikawa Fusei was not only suspicious of Adachi Mamba, but he was also provoked by Chin Ining's words. The people of Water Swamp Country listened to him. Adachi Mamba was very sly. He already had his own connections among the nobles, merchants, and the common people. Now that he was not sure if he was colluding with the nobles of Dezhou, he could not let him go. Ishikawa Fusei turned around and pulled out a slender sword. Adachi Mamba's eyes were filled with fear. He quickly said, "Daimyo, I did not collude with outsiders." "Daimyo, go to hell." Ishikawa Fusei did not want to listen to his explanation. He seized this opportunity and swung his sword. Adachi Mamba was so scared that he rolled and crawled to avoid the attack. As a daimyo, if he wanted to kill his subordinate samurai, the samurai would not be able to avoid it. Adachi Mamba's action immediately proved that he had betrayed the daimyo. All the samurai and nobles present rushed forward and killed this traitor for the daimyo. Hiratsuki stood behind Ishikawa Fusei. Seeing one of the people who harmed Sakurai die so easily, he even regretted that he did not directly take action all these years and insisted on a face-to-face duel. He knew that this person was a coward and would never agree to a duel with him, but he still kept asking for a duel. How much time did he waste? How stupid was he? He should learn from Sakurai's master and achieve his goal as soon as possible. At this time, Hiratsuki suddenly realized something. Ishikawa Fusei watched as Adachi Mamba's body was dragged away. He turned around and ordered, "Men, get all the samurai ready and line up at the dock. I want to see what a little woman can do." When they heard about war, the women retreated to the back timidly and did not dare to say anything. The men shouted in unison. Their roars shook the sky and were full of vigor. Ishikawa Fusei led his men and quickly prepared. At this time, Chin Ining had already returned to the dock. Thanks to Adachi Mamba's order to the guards at the dock, all her actions were not stopped. As soon as she boarded the ship, Chin Ining asked, "Has the signal been sent out?" The leader sent it out when he went out. Good. Chin Ining took off the hairpin on her head and smiled. "I think Mr. Xia and Mr. Su are waiting anxiously." Several people laughed heartily. Especially Ji Yun. Just now, the princess said that beside the daimyo, "I think that Lecher's life is in danger." Chin Ining said carelessly, "He used this method to harm Sakurai back then. Now that he's retribution, it's what he deserves." Knowing that Chin Ining had returned safely, everyone on the ship heaved a sigh of relief and began to prepare under her command. Chapter 1070. Water Swamp Country was embroiled in wars of varying sizes every year, and the people were used to dealing with them. It wasn't that they were used to war, but that their words carried little weight. The people in power didn't care about their feelings or opinions, and as time passed, they could only silently bear the consequences of war. They watched as their men lined up neatly and headed to the seaside. The women and children could only hide in their simple thatched huts and weep silently. In the evening, the sea seemed to be burning with orange-red flames that stretched to the horizon. Ishikawa Fusei led his 200 soldiers and lined up at the dock. Facing the setting sun, he looked at the dozens of people who were waiting for him on the deck and laughed loudly. "If you're willing to kneel and beg for mercy, I promise to leave you a whole corpse." The samurai who came with him all laughed and rubbed their palms together. Their greedy eyes were fixed on the ship. They wanted all the goods and women on the ship. Chin Ining listened to Gao Delay's explanation and laughed. He also said loudly, "Ishikawa Fusei, if you're willing to reveal the truth of what happened back then, clear Sakurai's name, and kowtow in front of her grave, I'll spare your family's lives." Gao Delay immediately translated Chin Ining's words into Japanese and announced loudly. When Ishikawa Fusei heard Sakurai's name, he immediately became irritable and shouted, "Sakurai, that traitor, I will never forgive him." "Is that so? Traitor? You know very well who the real traitor is." Ishikawa Fusei's forehead twitched. He could see that the other party knew about what happened back then, and he also knew Japanese. He didn't want to give them a chance to speak. What happened back then could only be left to rot in history. Cut the crap. Since you want to fight, then let's fight. Ishikawa Fusei looked at the dozens of people lined up at the dock and said confidently. Chin Ining smiled. "I hope Ishikawa Daimyo doesn't regret it. I gave you a chance, but you didn't want it." Ishikawa Fusei sneered. Just as he was about to speak, he seemed to see something strange on the surface of the sea. In the direction of the setting sun, from the point where the burning sunset and the sea met, a row of bulging sails was coming towards them. Moreover, it was already very close to them. The golden light of the setting sun and the light of the waves were very dazzling. All of them had to squint their eyes to look at people. When the ships were still far away, he did not look carefully at them at all. The soldiers began to get restless, and everyone saw the fleet that was rapidly approaching. One ship, two ships, in their panic, they couldn't even count the number of ships coming from the other side. They only felt that the ships were covering the sky and earth, like a net, quickly surrounding the pier. A green dot of light slowly rose from the largest ship. Immediately after, a red dot of light shot up into the sky from the ship on the shore, as if it was responding to that dot of light. Ishikawa Fushing was dumbfounded. The soldiers under his command were even more timid as they clutched their spears tightly, their straw sandals uncontrollably stepping back. Qin Yining stood on the deck of the ship, the evening wind blowing against her brocade robe. The light color of her robe was dyed red by the setting sun. A few strands of her long hair danced in the wind. She chuckled softly and raised her left hand. Of the 20 or so ships that had already approached, hundreds of small boats were quickly lowered by ropes. The sound of splashing water and the shouts of soldiers could be heard. Thousands of people boarded the pier one after another. These were the guards of the prince's residence who had passed through Lichitian after Pang Shao had been assassinated by the people of Dongfu County. But in reality, they had all been trained for a long time. After transporting the treasure, they had gathered at Golden Harbor. Taking advantage of the fire in Golden Harbor, Qin Yining had brought them onto the 30 ships. Pang Shao had always been known for his ability to lead troops. The guards he had trained were led by Jinghu Wei. They quickly boarded the pier and lined up in formation in the blink of an eye. Coupled with their superior weapons and uniform armor, and strict discipline, they were 100 times more imposing than the Water Swamp Country soldiers. Not to mention, there were only 1,000 of them against 200. The suppression of numbers was enough to make anyone despair. Ishikawa Fushing felt a dull pain in his chest. Only then did he realize that he had been so nervous that he had forgotten to breathe. It must be fake, right? Was this a joke? Didn't they say that there were only a few dozen of them? Didn't they say that she was just a weak noble woman? How could such a weak girl have such a well-equipped and well-trained team? Such a powerful force was enough to dominate the entire Neon continent. How could they fight this battle? The crushing advantage in numbers was enough to annihilate all of them. Ishikawa Fushing's hands trembled. His subordinates' eyes were bloodshot as they gripped their swords tightly, ready to face the enemy. Everyone's blood was boiling, and they wanted nothing more than to pounce on the enemy and tear them apart. Compared to their previous worries, now that more than 20 ships had surrounded the harbor and more than 1,000 of their own soldiers had successfully boarded the pier, the excitement brought about by their overwhelming strength made their fighting spirit soar. They had won by momentum. The battle hadn't even begun yet, but they had already won half the battle. The people nearby heard the commotion and came out to take a look out of curiosity. They were stunned by the neat formation of troops on the pier. They had never seen so many people in their previous battles. The people ran around to spread the news. In their panic, some ran away with their children, while others stayed in the village to wait for their deaths. A large portion of the people gathered by the mountain road, looking at the beach in despair. Qin Yining ordered Gao Delay, "Tell them what I said loudly." "Yes." Gao Delay's voice was loud and clear. Qin Yining said, "Ishikawa Daimyo, I had no intention of landing on your land, but you hid the truth, slandered Sakurai Hideaki, refused to clear her name, and even refused to allow her ashes to be buried in her homeland. You're so sanctimonious, jealous, and cruel to your loyal subordinates. Your conduct will only bring disaster to Water Swamp Country. Do you still deserve to be a daimyo?" Gao Delay's voice echoed on the beach, and all of the Water Swamp Country people looked at each other. Ishikawa Daimyo was covered in cold sweat, and his face flushed red. He straightened his neck and cursed, "Bastard. You're spouting nonsense. I don't want to waste words with you. I'll give you two options. First, you tell the truth and bury Sakurai. Then, you kowtow in front of Sakurai Hideaki's grave and admit your mistakes. My army will only guard the beach. Once you do that, we'll leave immediately and won't interfere with Water Swamp Country's affairs. Second, you stubbornly refuse to tell the truth and continue to slander Sakurai Hideaki. My army will have no choice but to fight you and kill you. Then, I'll bury Sakurai. Chapter 1071. As soon as Gao Delay spoke, the seaside fell silent. The commoners in the distance heaved a sigh of relief when they realized that the enemy wouldn't do anything to them. Some were still nervous in the face of the army, some were afraid that they wouldn't keep their word, and most were worried about their families in the army. They had already lost a lot of their families and homes because of the war. Now that they were facing a powerful enemy, they had no chance of winning at all. Ishikawa Fusei's subordinates knew this as well. As soon as they saw the foreign army, they became wary and unconvinced. On the other hand, they waited expectantly for Ishikawa Fusei's decision. Ishikawa Fusei sensed that everyone was sizing him up, and his face turned even redder. Did he want his reputation, or his life? But from the looks of it, even if he risked his life and fought, his reputation wouldn't be any better once all of his subordinates died. Once the enemy took over Water Swamp Country, wouldn't they spread the news of what had happened all those years ago? It wasn't even a question of whether the commoners would believe him. The right to speak was always in the hands of the strong. Ishikawa Fusei thought that since he had already lost his life and his reputation, he might as well preserve his life and think about the future. But he had always been known for his bravery. If he were to admit defeat in front of others, it would be difficult for him to speak. Sweat dripped down from his head through the cracks in his armor, and the golden light of the setting sun was so blinding that he couldn't open his eyes. The 1,000+ soldiers still stood with their backs to the setting sun, completely silent. Ishikawa Fusei's heart suddenly turned cold. He even wondered in bewilderment, how did he end up where he was today? Was it because of what had happened to Sakurai Hideaki? Chin Ining said, Ishikawa Daimyo, what is your decision? Everyone's eyes focused on Ishikawa Fusei's face. Ishikawa Fusei's lips trembled, and he couldn't say a single word. Chin Ining raised his hand and made a gesture. Ha! The guards of the prince's mansion standing in great numbers on the dock immediately roared. Then, the 1,000+ guards all got into position and roared, ha! This unified roar brought a great shock to the people of the Water Swamp Nation, causing them to huddle together in fear. Among the 200 or so soldiers, some of the younger ones even fell to the ground on their butts. Body Sichuan Fuxing shuddered and almost fell off his horse. In his panic, he blurted out his choice. First option, I choose the first option. Gao Delay translated Ishikawa Fusei's words to Chin Ining. Chin Ining smiled and said, all right, then I will keep my promise. Please do the same. Tomorrow morning, I want you to bring your subordinates and family members to personally welcome Sakurai. I want you to gather all the citizens of Water Swamp Country and have at least one person from each family to attend Sakurai Hideaki's funeral. She wanted him to kowtow to Sakurai and admit his guilt in front of the entire country. Sichuan Fuxing was enraged. Don't push your luck. He growled. What answered him was another thunderous roar from the guards of the prince's mansion. Ishikawa Fuxing's mount was so frightened that it started to pace restlessly. It took him a great effort to stabilize himself. In the face of absolute power, he had no right to choose, much less reason. Sichuan Fuxing felt extremely embarrassed for a moment and only wanted to escape from this place. He didn't have time to think about it and turned his horse around. He didn't care if there was anyone in front of him and directly urged his horse to rush out in the direction of the mansion. It was as if there was a fierce ghost chasing after him. The samurai and nobles hurriedly urged their horses to give chase. Seeing that the daimyo and samurai had all fled, the 200 or so water swamp country soldiers lost all will to fight and scattered like birds and beasts. Qin Yining sneered. When he thought about how Sakurai had been banished by such a despicable person, he felt a pang of disappointment and regret. Alliance Master, it's so satisfying this time. Liao Zhibing and Gao Delay laughed heartily. This kind of overt scheme, open saber and spear, and the feeling of using strength to crush the enemy was simply too exhilarating. At that moment, a small boat slowly approached the shore. Su Weiji and Xiaoyu walked onto the dock with the help of the guards. Qin Yining also disembarked from the boat. When he saw the two of them, he smiled. Sirs, your timing is just right. Sooner or later, the threat to Ishikawa Fushing will be halved. Thank you for your hard work. The princess consort's signal came just in time. Otherwise, it would have taken us some time to get here. Xiaoyu and Su Weiji smiled as they looked around. The two of them walked around a few times. It's been so long since we've had our feet on the ground. After getting off the boat, this old man feels like he's swaying. Qin Yining chuckled. I felt the same way when I got off the boat. Even now, I still feel like I'm floating. I think it'll take us some time to get used to it. Qin Yining turned around and instructed Ji Dashun and the others, tell the brothers to set up camp here and cook. It's rare that we have the chance to go ashore, so let's not stay on the boat. Did you leave a helmsman on the boat? We left a helmsman behind. Don't worry, Princess Consort. Xiaoyu said, since the Princess Consort and Ishikawa Fushing said that they wouldn't disturb the commoners, then our troops shouldn't enter the city. I think so too. However, we should replenish the food and fresh water on the boat. We'll leave a small group of people to transport water and bring some people to buy rice and grain. That's good. Su Weiji agreed. Wang Ye's military is strict and impartial. In the past, when he was fighting, he never disturbed the commoners. If we maintain this style, it'll be a good habit for our troops in the future. The Princess Consort said something very well just now. War is a matter between soldiers. It has nothing to do with commoners. Qin Yining smiled. This is what Wang Yi always says. I'm just influenced by him. Everyone couldn't help but laugh. After everything was arranged, Su Weiji said, I wonder how Wang Yi is doing now. He followed Your Majesty back to the capital. I wonder if everything went smoothly. Qin Yining thought of Pang Zhao's beating, and the smile on his face faded. His life is probably not in danger. Your Majesty still has to keep Wang Yi alive to interrogate him about the whereabouts of the treasure. However, he'll definitely suffer. We had no choice but to go out to sea this time. Since it's for Sakurai's matter, isn't it also to avoid the limelight? Once everything is settled, we'll go back. Qin Yining didn't feel at ease leaving Pang Zhao alone in the capital. Xiaoyu and Su Weiji also nodded. Seeing Qin Yining's frown, they smiled and comforted, Princess Consort, you don't have to worry too much. First of all, Wang Ye's ability to adapt to changes is extremely strong. He also has imperial bodyguards protecting him. It's enough for him to protect himself. Second of all, things might not be as bad as we think. Moreover, this trip went smoothly and we'll be going back soon. At that time, we'll deal with whatever comes our way. As long as we work together, there's nothing we can't solve. Qin Yining nodded in agreement. She also thought the same. Although the reasoning was simple, it was impossible for her not to worry about Pang Zhao. At this time, Pang Zhao, who was being worried about by Qin Yining, wasn't actually living as badly as she imagined. After Li Qitian returned to the capital, he listened to Pang Zhao's suggestion and set up camp outside the city. After the officials respectfully welcomed the emperor, he was completely tied down by government affairs for the next few days. He was busy dealing with the remnants of the Liu family and had to deal with the famine after the flood. He was also in a hurry to find the treasure. He was so anxious that he couldn't tell what day it was. As a result, Li Qitian naturally didn't have time to deal with Pang Zhao. Pang Zhao returned to the residence bestowed by the emperor. Originally, there was a large family, but now he was the only one at home. Naturally, his heart felt empty. Fortunately, he knew that Qin Yining would return soon and that the entire family would be living peacefully in Shiyu. His heart felt slightly better. In addition, Ji Ziyu often secretly came to see him. The two exchanged information and advice on the court. Occasionally, they would chat. Pang Zhao's mood was much better. At night, Ji Ziyu still avoided the guards and came to the study in the outer courtyard. As soon as he pushed the door open and entered the room, he saw that the table by the window was already prepared with wine and dishes. Pang Zhao sat cross-legged on one side and smiled as he pointed to the opposite side. "I knew you would come at this time." Ji Ziyu smiled faintly. His fair and handsome face was reflected in the dim light like a top-notch flawless jade. "Are your injuries better today?" As he spoke, he sat cross-legged across from Pang Zhao and took 2 mouthfuls of wine. "They're all better. They're just superficial wounds." Pang Zhao poured Ji Ziyu a cup of wine and said, "Don't drink on an empty stomach. We're just chatting. Eat more. This roast chicken was specially made according to your taste." Ji Ziyu liked sweet things, so the roast chicken tasted sweet. Pang Zhao tore off 2 drumsticks and placed them in Ji Ziyu's bowl. Ji Ziyu did not stand on ceremony and took a big bite of the drumstick. After a while, he sighed. "My men found that there are more and more starving people along the river. We have roast chicken to eat, but they can't even eat a single meal a day." As he spoke, he put down the drumstick and sighed heavily. Pang Zhao put down his wine bowl and said in a low voice, "You know that Sister Yi has some business." To be honest, more than a month ago, Sister Yi had already ordered the head shopkeeper to go to the south to provide relief. At this time, he has almost run out of money. However, with so many mouths to feed, it's not possible to rely on one person's wealth to feed them. I had to give some money to Sister Yi to make up for the shortfall, but my power is limited. To do this, the best way is for your Majesty to do it. There was no need to elaborate on the rest. It was enough to make one sigh. How could your Majesty be in the mood to do it? He was on the verge of going crazy over the treasure. Even if he was targeting the Liu family, it was because of the treasure. Pang Zhao and Ji Ziyu both knew that Li Qitian's thoughts were not on the common people. The two of them were silent for a long time before Ji Ziyu remembered something else. "That's right, I heard some news. Your Majesty's spies were released before you returned to the capital. I heard that they were investigating the whereabouts of the Qin clan. Do you have enough men by the Qin clan's side? If you encounter your Majesty's spies, what are your chances of winning?" Pang Zhao frowned when he heard this. "Your Majesty arranged for them before I returned to the capital?" You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.